If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21. This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. Days passed. Since the night he let Yelan go, Luo Qing's life had been uneventful. Each day was spent fishing by the harbor or sitting in the tea house listening to Uncle Tian's tall tales. He seemed less like an envoy from Snezhnaya and more like a local Liyue native. As always, Luo Qing was on a small boat at the harbor, intently watching the bobbing float on the water's surface. He'd been fishing since sunrise and hadn't caught a single fish. Stubbornly refusing to admit defeat, he was determined not to go home empty-handed. "Lord Luo Qing, maybe we should just buy some fish from the market." Natalia, standing behind him with an empty basket, couldn't hide her impatience. "Shh, don't scare the fish away," Luo Qing whispered back. +1 frustration from Natalia. Natalia, looking utterly defeated, stared at the float bobbing in the water, praying for a foolish fish to take the bait and end her suffering. She now understood why Igor and Sergei had quickly volunteered to chase down debtors when they heard Luo Qing planned a fishing trip. She had been foolish enough to stay, trapped as his reluctant assistant for the day. With her chin in her hands, Natalia's legs dangled over the edge of the boat, stirring up ripples in the water. Just as she was daydreaming about when the torturous fishing session might end, a gentle breeze brushed past her shoulder. Startled, she turned to see an owl perched on her shoulder. The owl held a letter in its beak. The envelope's elegant, intricate design looked vaguely familiar to her. A letter for Lord Luo Qing. Natalia took the letter from the owl's beak with a puzzled expression. The owl glanced at Luo Qing, then flapped its wings and flew off. "Lord Luo Qing, someone sent you a letter," she said, walking over to hand it to him. "A letter?" Luo Qing took it, recognizing the pattern on the envelope even before opening it. It was the mark of a witch, a deep crimson moth engulfed in flames. It could only mean one thing. "Signora." He looked up at the owl circling overhead before opening the envelope to read the contents. "In such a hurry. Just what did Her Majesty the Tsaritsa promise you?" Whether it was him, the yet-to-arrive child, or Signora, they all had the same mission, to locate Rex Lapis and retrieve the Geo Archon's Gnosis. Signora had been stationed in Mondstadt, overseeing the retrieval of the Inmo Archon's Gnosis, leaving Child in charge of the Liyue mission. But with Child's responsibilities still tying him up in Snezhnaya, Luo Qing had been sent ahead to make preparations in Liyue. Yet now, before Child had even shown up, Signora had already reached out to him. The letter was straightforward. The Inmo Gnosis had been secured in Mondstadt, and she would be arriving in Liyue before Child. She wanted Luo Qing to meet with her, provide any information he had gathered, and ideally, reveal Rex Lapis' whereabouts. The subtext was clear: Signora wanted to be the one to secure the Geo Archon's Gnosis and win favor with the Tsaritsa. "Such a loyal servant of Her Majesty," Luo Qing muttered, shaking his head as he reeled in his fishing rod. "Lord Luo Qing, does that mean you're done fishing?" Natalia tried not to sound too hopeful. "Yeah, let's head to the market and buy some fish today." Late at night, Liyue Harbor, an upscale inn. To avoid drawing attention, Signora hadn't taken control of the local Fatui forces but had contacted Luo Qing directly, asking to meet in private. Even if Luo Qing were promoted to the official 12th Harbinger, Signora was still his superior due to her higher rank. He had no choice but to comply, sneaking to the address provided in her letter. Standing before the room Signora had indicated, Luo Qing took a deep breath, steeling himself before knocking. "Come in," came a mature, sultry voice from inside. As he pushed open the door, he saw a silhouette behind a folding screen, a curvaceous figure, unmistakably feminine. Rounding the screen, he was momentarily stunned by what he saw. Huge, way bigger than coconut milk. "Lady Signora," he greeted, lowering his gaze to maintain respect. Despite his newfound power and confidence that he could take her on if things got heated, the formalities remained. Well, I never imagined that the little boy trailing behind Arlecchino would one day become a trainee harbinger," Signora said lazily, leaning against the window with an air of superiority. "I'll get straight to the point. How much do you know about Morix's whereabouts?" "They're really that big?" "What was that?" Signora's brow furrowed. "Ahem, I mean. I know where he is, Lady Signora," Luo Qing replied quickly, recovering from his lapse. "You know." Her expression became noticeably more eager. Though Rex Lapis was the deity who governed Liyue, he had gradually withdrawn from public life after entrusting governance to the Luo Qing. These days, the citizens only saw him once a year during the Rite of Dissension. Signora's mission was to find Rex Lapis and finalize a contract with him on behalf of the Tsaritsa. Yet even the Luo Qing struggled to see the Geo Archon in person, so how could outsiders like the Fatui hope to succeed? Yes, Lady Signora. In fact, he's right here in Liyue Harbor, Luo Qing confirmed. He had sent Igor and the others to investigate the Wangsheng funeral parlor upon his arrival, discovering that a man named Zhongli worked as a consultant there. It seemed that when Morix had nothing better to do, he would roam Liyue disguised as Zhongli. In Liyue Harbor. Signora's surprise was evident. She hadn't expected things to go so smoothly. Yes. If you wish to meet him, I can take you there tomorrow, Luo Qing offered. Oh? And why not just tell me where he is right now? Afraid I'll steal the glory from you. Signora's eyes narrowed, her tone playful yet taunting. Wow, you're sharp. That's exactly it. Luo Qing said, grinning as he gave her a thumbs up. +1 frustration from Signora. There was something about Luo Qing's respectful demeanor that rubbed Signora the wrong way, almost as if he didn't fear her in the slightest. Since when were youngsters this bold? Fine, if you want the credit so badly, I won't stop you. Take me to him first thing in the morning. Understood. How early are we talking? Luo Qing asked out of nowhere. At dawn. Got it. She replied, narrowing her eyes. Understood, Luo Qing said, pretending to bow dutifully. Good. Now get out, Signora said dismissively. Was Pantalone out of his mind to recommend this guy as a candidate for the 12th Harbinger? Just as she was mentally preparing to get some rest and shake off the fatigue from her journey, Luo Qing suddenly paused at the door and turned back. Lady Signora, it's so late, maybe I should just squeeze in here for the night? Don't worry, I don't hog the blankets. He said with a cheeky grin. What? Her eyebrow twitched. Chapter 22, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. The next morning. In the end, Luo Qing's hopes of sharing a bed with Rosalind remained unfulfilled. His survival instincts kicked in just before her patience reached its breaking point, and he made a hasty exit. Of course, if he hadn't known the whereabouts of Rex Lapis, Rosalind might very well have incinerated him on the spot. Luo Qing waited for a while in the hotel lobby. Soon enough, Rosalind appeared, dressed in a simple, understated outfit, a far cry from the ornate dress she had worn the night before. Lead the way, and I hope you're not trying to deceive me, Rosalind said coldly. She was the ultimate purist, and if Luo Qing weren't her colleague, who happened to know Morix's location, she would have burned him to ashes for his offhand remarks. Of course not. Just follow me, Luo Qing replied with a grin, paying no mind to Rosalina's icy expression. They walked together through the streets of Liyue until they arrived at the front of the Wangsheng funeral parlor. Its doors were tightly shut, and aside from the commission board outside, the entrance was deserted. Oh? This is the place? Looks like no one's here, Rosalind said, arms crossed, giving Luo Qing a dangerous look that practically screamed, you better have a good explanation, or I'll turn you to ash. Relax, Lady Rosalind. No need to rush, Luo Qing said calmly, as if expecting her skepticism. He stepped up to the commission board and picked up a small wooden plaque. The front was blank, ready for a message, but the back bore a playful inscription in a cutesy font, buy one steal, get one free. It was one of the quirky marketing strategies of a certain young funeral parlor director. Luo Qing took a deep breath, raised his fist, and pounded on the door. He shouted. Director who? Time to wake up and open for business. According to Natalia's gossip, if the Wangsheng funeral parlor was closed in the morning, it was likely because Hu Tao, the director, was still sleeping in. A little wake-up call would usually do the trick. After a few heavy knocks, Luo Qing heard hurried footsteps from the other side of the door, accompanied by the sound of things being knocked over. Ugh, who's in such a rush to set off? Hu Tao opened the door, rubbing her eyes. In her haste to answer the door, she was still half-dressed, one of her socks was only pulled halfway up her ankle, and her crimson collar was unbuttoned, revealing her pale neck and collarbone. Even her oversized hat was askew, several stray strands of hair poking out. When her eyes finally focused, revealing those plum blossom irises, Luo Qing's heart skipped a beat. Too cute. Director Hu, we have a commission. We'd like to speak with your consultant, Zhongli, Luo Qing said, trying to remain composed. Hey? You woke me up so urgently just to see Zhongli. Hu Tao pouted, clearly annoyed at being disturbed. Damn, so cute. Luo Qing felt as though an arrow had struck his heart. Was cuteness the world's most dangerous weapon? Ahem. Perhaps I'd consider buying a steal, Luo Qing said nonchalantly. With the Northland Bank backing him, a little expense like this was trivial. Really? You've come at the perfect time, we're running a promotion, buy one steal, get one free. Hu Tao's eyes lit up, her annoyance vanishing instantly. She swung the door wide open and dragged Luo Qing inside. Meanwhile, Rosalind followed them in, frowning in confusion. Once inside, Hu Tao seemed to realize she was still half-dressed. She quickly excused herself, leaving Luo Qing and Rosalind in the lobby while she dashed upstairs to make herself presentable. What exactly is this Wangsheng funeral parlor? Rosalind asked, staring at the sign above the door with its bold black characters. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Liyue's top funeral service provider, Luo Qing said, sipping the tea Hu Tao had left out. They handle everything from burials to spiritual rites, even gravestone inscriptions and burning offerings. Rosalina's expression remained blank. Would you like to consider it, Lady Rosalind? We're in a high-risk profession, after all. You never know when you might meet an untimely end. The Wangsheng funeral parlor specializes in dignified services. Even if you die in Inajima, they'll make sure you're brought back for a proper send-off. Humph. Should I take that as a curse? Rosalina's tone was frosty. His mouth is just as obnoxious as that Scaramouche's. Not at all. I'm just offering a practical suggestion. Of course, it'd be ideal if you lived a long life, Lady Rosalind. Luo Qing said, taking another sip to hide his smile. Before long, Hu Tao reappeared, now fully dressed and holding a stack of pamphlets. She ran over excitedly and thrust them at Luo Qing. Here are our latest funeral packages. Which one would you like? We're mainly here to see consultant Zhongli, Luo Qing said, eyeing the exorbitantly priced full-service packages on the pamphlet. Hu Tao held the pamphlets close to her chest, her plum blossom eyes narrowing. Her gaze seemed to say, no steal, no Zhongli. Fine, we'll take the most expensive package, Luo Qing sighed. The Northland Bank's money wasn't his, so why not spend freely? Really? I'm serious, he affirmed. Yes. A completed sale. Hu Tao's face lit up as she practically bounced with excitement. Any special requests for your service? Perhaps a favorite song during the ceremony, specific types of spirit money, or should we burn a house or clothes as offerings? Also, full payment in advance, as per our policy. She added, grinning. Luo Qing turned to Rosalind and suggested with a straight face, it's a buy one, get one free deal. Should we go halves on it? You can get a steal too. Half an hour later. After enduring a barrage of Hu Tao's unique services, both Luo Qing, and a reluctant Rosalind, had become proud owners of underground real estate pre-purchased plots for their future graves. Even if they met their end in foreign lands, the Wangsheng funeral parlor would ensure their remains received a grand farewell. Hu Tao was delighted, surprised that such profitable business had come knocking just after her morning nap. Rosalind, on the other hand, was seething. She couldn't shake the feeling that Luo Qing had somehow jinxed her. If they didn't meet Morix today, she swore she would scatter his ashes herself. Not even the Tsaritsa could stop her. She promised. Director Hu, we've bought the package. Now, can we finally see consultant Zhongli? Luo Qing asked. Well, Zhongli is merely a consultant, not a full-time employee here. If you want to meet him, you need a bit of luck and timing, Hu Tao replied, smiling. So, you don't actually know when he'll be here, do you? Exactly, she said, nodding. Luo Qing felt a chill run down his spine. When he turned, Rosalina's eyes had gone cold, murderous, even. She'd followed Luo Qing around all morning, only to end up buying a tombstone and fielding bizarre questions from this strange girl about whether she and Luo Qing wanted to be buried together. Rosalind was a warrior of pure-hearted devotion. To suggest something like this was practically dancing on her landmine. If it weren't for the hope of meeting Morix, she would have burned down this whole establishment long ago. Luo Qing's mind raced as he saw Rosalina's temper flaring. He considered using time zero to whisk her out of there before Hu Tao bore the brunt of her rage, but just then, footsteps echoed from the entrance. A man in a brown robe, patterned with dragon scales, stepped calmly inside. Chapter 23, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. Ah, Consultant Zhongli, you're just in time. These guests are looking for you. Hu Tao waved cheerfully as Zhongli stepped inside. She then walked over to him, looking uncharacteristically serious. These two are our 5-star customers at the Wangsheng funeral parlor. They've got a request for you, so make sure to take good care of them, okay? With that, she grabbed the receipt and headed to the back to file it away. Zhongli turned to face Luo Qing and Rosalind, his expression calm and inquisitive. Since the two of you are esteemed clients of Director Hu, may I ask what business brings you to me? He asked politely. This isn't the right place to talk. Zhongli, would you mind if we went somewhere more private? Luo Qing suggested, glancing at Rosalind. Given her fiery temper, he had no doubt she'd blurt out Morix within moments if they stayed here, potentially blowing Zhongli's cover. Very well, Zhongli agreed with a nod. Outside Liyue harbor, at the outskirts of Liyue. Liyue was a bustling city, its population dense, and Ningguang's informants were everywhere. Unsure where to have a private conversation, Luo Qing suggested they move outside the city to avoid any prying eyes. The outskirts of Liyue seemed like a suitable choice. The three of them sat down in a quiet pavilion. But before Luo Qing or Rosalind could speak, Zhongli broke the silence, his gaze fixed on Rosalind. Is she ready? He asked softly. Humph, that's none of your concern, Morix, Rosalind scoffed, arms crossed, her expression defiant. All you need to do is honor your agreement with Her Majesty the Tsaritsa, fulfill your contract and hand over the gnosis. Zhongli regarded her coolly, unperturbed. I will fulfill the contract I made with her. However, I still wonder if now is the right time. He glanced back towards Liyue harbor, his face reflective. To relinquish the gnosis meant to forfeit his identity as a god, and without the protection of an archon, Liyue's fate was no longer something he could predict. Zhongli, are you worried that Liyue will crumble without a god's protection? Luo Qing asked, his tone calm. Indeed. Liyue is like a child learning to walk, with its hand still held by its parents. Once that hand is withdrawn, who knows if it will stumble or stride forward. Ha, the gnosis is merely a symbol for you, isn't it? What, are you trying to tell me that the mighty Morix, who once waged war across the land, can't protect Liyue without it? Rosalind's voice was sharp, laced with disdain. Luo Qing shot Rosalind a sideways glance, thinking to himself that this gentleness was only possible because Zhongli's temperament had mellowed over the years. Back during the Archon War, she wouldn't have finished that sentence before being skewered by a stone spear. Lady Rosalind, I think you're missing the point. Mr. Zhongli here is simply looking to retire, isn't that right? Luo Qing said with a knowing smile. Indeed, Zhongli replied with a small nod. Though Luo Qing's phrasing was blunt, it captured the essence of his thoughts. The age of gods is over, and the era of humans is dawning. Liyue has walked alongside gods for 3,700 years since its founding. But the old gods will inevitably depart, and I am unsure if Liyue is truly prepared to embrace this new era. So, until you confirm Liyue can thrive without the presence of the Geo Archon, you're not planning to hand over the gnosis. Rosalind's eyes narrowed, her irritation growing. We don't have the luxury of waiting for you to play your games, she snapped. Lady Rosalind, Luo Qing leaned in and whispered, you might want to hold back. If this man decides to make a move, neither of us stand a chance. Rosalind's expression didn't soften in the least, if anything, her disdain deepened. To her, Luo Qing's warning merely labeled him as a coward. Turning his attention back to Zhongli, Luo Qing noted the Archon's pensive expression. He didn't look like someone who had orchestrated a test of mortals against gods and adepti. Luo Qing decided to lay out his idea. If Zhongli wants to gauge Liyue's strength without him, why not conduct an abdication test? Let's see if Liyue can withstand the tides without the Geo Archon. A test of abdication, an interesting suggestion. Would you care to elaborate, young friend? Zhongli asked, intrigued. Ah, young friend is too formal. Please, just call me Luo Qing, he replied with a grin. Luo Qing. Are you from Liyue? Zhongli asked, curious. Not exactly. I grew up in Snezhnaya, a true winter child at heart. Then, please, Luo Qing, Go ahead. Certainly. Luo Qing patted Rosalina's shoulder, signaling her to stay quiet, and continued. Zhongli, you're well aware of the issues Liyue faces, correct? The distancing of the Adepti, the dangers brewing beneath the sea, these are all concerns of yours. Zhongli nodded, his gaze steady. Why not bring all these problems to the surface at once, forcing Liyue to face them head-on? Luo Qing suggested. Pressure reveals a person's true limits, and the same goes for nations. What do you mean? Zhongli inquired, intrigued. Simple. If you want to see how Liyue fares without you, then just fake your death. With the Rite of Dissension approaching, all you need to do is simulate your demise in front of Liyue's people. We at the Fatui will handle the rest. You can remain as you are now, a mere mortal, and observe the unfolding events, Luo Qing explained. Initially, Luo Qing assumed that Zhongli had masterminded the plan to fake his death, but after observing Zhongli's uncertainty, he realized the Archon might not have fully fleshed out his scheme. Since he was already here, he had no problem giving the legendary strategist a nudge in the right direction. Besides, this way, he might earn extra credit when he eventually reported back to Her Majesty the Tsaritsa. A staged death, Zhongli mused. It's certainly a bold idea, Luo Qing. Well then, Zhongli, do you agree? Luo Qing pressed. Yes, it's worth attempting, Zhongli nodded slowly. From there, Luo Qing laid out the details of the plan, covering everything, inciting tension between Liyue's human and Adepti populations, manipulating Child into becoming an unwitting pawn, and finally releasing Osial beneath the waters of Gyun Stone Forest. The thoroughness of the plan left Zhongli and Rosalind slightly taken aback. Zhongli seemed intrigued by the proposal, and even when Luo Qing mentioned potential casualties during Osial's release, the Archon made no move to object. He had already accepted that if bloodshed was the price of progress, then it was a price worth paying. Truly a man shaped by the Archon War. An agreement was quickly reached. Zhongli would concoct a convincing death scene to enact during the Rite of Dissension, while Luo Qing and Rosalind would wait for Child's arrival and manipulate him into playing his part. The three of them would then retreat to the shadows to enjoy the spectacle over a cup of tea. If Liyue couldn't handle Osial, Zhongli would intervene to end the chaos himself. Once their discussion was over, Zhongli returned to the Wangsheng funeral parlor to prepare for his grand exit, leaving Luo Qing and Rosalind alone in the pavilion. With the plan now in motion, the Gnosis retrieval was practically secured. Regardless of the final outcome, Rosalind would have the Geo-Archon's Gnosis to present to the Tsaritsa. Yet, for reasons she couldn't quite understand, she felt irritated. From the Wangsheng funeral parlor to the meeting with Morux, she felt like she was playing second fiddle to Luo Qing, as if he were the one leading and she merely his follower. Her long-cultivated pride chafed at the thought. But Luo Qing hadn't technically done anything wrong, so she couldn't justify lashing out. She decided to wait, biding her time for the moment when Luo Qing would inevitably cross a line. When that time came, she'd be ready. Just you wait. Luo Qing. Comment. 5 comment. Vote. 1 left. Chapter 24, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. Time flew by, and soon enough, the long-awaited Rite of Dissension arrived. Since getting acquainted with Zhongli, Luo Qing had finally found a kindred spirit in the art of fishing. Every few days, he'd stop by the Wangsheng funeral parlor to drag Zhongli along, casting lines together at Liyue's fishing spots. Over time, the two of them had become quite familiar with each other. Luo Qing even offered some constructive suggestions for Zhongli's dramatic death scene, advocating for a head-first dive from the sky while dramatically shouting, "My life is over." Unsurprisingly, Zhongli rejected his ideas. As for the belated arrival of Child, he remained blissfully ignorant of his role as the unwitting pawn. Luo Qing and Rosalind had carefully concealed their progress in Liyue, leading Child to believe they were failing miserably. Determined not to disappoint Her Majesty the Tsaritsa, Child proudly declared his intent to personally shoulder the task of retrieving the Geo-Archon's Gnosis. Child had a poor opinion of Luo Qing, perhaps due to the latter's unremarkable combat performance during the Fatui's selection process. Because of this, he didn't bother asking Luo Qing if he had any relevant information about Liyue's situation. With Child taking over operations at the Northland Bank and overseeing the replication of the sigils of permission at the research site, Luo Qing found himself with little to do. His days passed in idle leisure, often spent fishing with Zhongli. And now, the long-awaited Rite of Dissension had arrived. Early in the morning, Luo Qing led his 3 subordinates to Yujing Terrace, eager to secure a prime spot to witness Zhongli's dramatic performance. As they climbed the steps to Yujing Terrace, a soft and sweet voice reached Luo Qing's ears from behind. He turned to see a blonde girl and her floating companion asking passers-by for directions to the best vantage point for viewing the rite. Tisk, tisk, my foolish little sister. Finally, we meet, Luo Qing muttered to himself. Lord Luo Qing. Natalia looked at him quizzically, noticing his odd expression. Ah, it's nothing. Just spotted someone, interesting, Luo Qing replied with a smile before continuing his ascent. Knowing what was about to unfold and given his delicate position, Luo Qing chose not to mingle with the Liyue crowd gathered around Yujing Terrace. Instead, he took a small side path up to Mt Tianheng, finding a spot on a rocky outcrop halfway up the mountain where he could watch everything unfold below. Before long, the Millilith began dispersing the crowd, creating a clear space at the center of Yujing Terrace. Ning Guang and a group of officials emerged from the Ministry of Civil Affairs, moving to the center to prepare the ceremonial site. Feeling a sudden unease, Ning Guang glanced up towards Mt Tianheng and caught sight of Luo Qing and his group sitting on the rocks. He's here too? She recalled Yelan's report on the events at the research base and Luo Qing's involvement. Though he had let Yelan go twice, Ning Guang still couldn't trust him completely. A flicker of concern crossed her face, and she subtly gestured towards a hidden figure in the crowd. Yelan, blending seamlessly among the spectators, nodded and began to make her way toward Luo Qing's position. Oh? Here to watch the ceremony with me? Luo Qing said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the mountainside. He had easily caught on to Ning Guang's subtle signal. Natalia and the others glanced at him, puzzled by his seemingly random comment. Moments later, a shadow flickered through the trees, and Yelan stepped out to join them. Natalia and the others recognized her, the woman Luo Qing had released twice before. They didn't understand why their lord had let this spy go, but as his trusted subordinates, they didn't question his decisions. Why are you watching the rite from up here? Yelan asked, leaning casually against a nearby tree. Her hostility toward Luo Qing had diminished after being spared twice. Too many people down there. Besides, the higher up you are, the better the view, Luo Qing replied with a smirk. And you? He turned to look at Yelan. Shouldn't you be down there handling security? If anything happens to your precious Archon, wouldn't you be held responsible? He chuckled, wondering what expression she'd make when Zhongli's lifeless form plummeted headfirst onto Yujing Terrace later. Keeping an eye on you is my assignment, Yelan said coolly, her expression calm. Keeping an eye on me? Am I that charming? Luo Qing teased. +1 frustration from Yelan. Yelan said nothing more, settling herself against the tree and watching Luo Qing closely. Seeing that Yelan had fallen silent, Luo Qing lost interest in teasing her further. He pulled out a cup of homemade bubble tea and sat cross-legged on the rocks, sipping leisurely as he watched the preparations below. The presence of an extra person made Natalia and the others slightly tense. Every now and then, they'd glance at Yelan to ensure she wouldn't try anything suspicious. Meanwhile, a certain blonde girl and her floating companion had managed to squeeze through the crowd, taking their place near the ceremony site. A dragon's roar suddenly echoed from the heavens. The crowd looked up to see a cloud descending, a dragon's silhouette dancing within the true form of the Geo Archon. Having ruled Liyue for 3,700 years, Morix was a deeply revered figure among its people. Even Yelan, who was watching from the mountain, unconsciously adopted a respectful posture as the dragon's cry resonated. At Yujing Terrace below, Ning Guang stood before the incense table, awaiting the Archon's arrival to deliver his decree for Liyue's future. Every year, the Archon's pronouncements would ripple through Liyue's commerce, stirring up excitement and speculation. Thus, most of the spectators gathered for the rite were businessmen of all ranks and status. As the cloud dispersed, the crowd held its breath, expecting Morix to descend and bestow his decree. Instead, what landed on the incense table, scattering offerings everywhere, was the lifeless, stone-colored body of the Archon. Ning Guang's pupils dilated, a storm raging behind her composed facade. As the leader of the Qixing, she couldn't afford to panic, no matter the crisis. Suppressing her shock, Ning Guang approached the body, bending slightly to check for any sign of life. After a thorough examination, she furrowed her brow and announced in a low voice. The Archon has been slain. Seal off the area. The crowd erupted in chaos, whispers and shouts filling the air. The Millilith moved quickly, sealing off the entrances to Yujing Terrace, allowing no one to leave. Ning Guang steadied herself and cast a sharp glance towards Luo Qing's position. From her vantage point, she saw him sitting there, completely unruffled, sipping his tea as if he were watching an ordinary show. Was it you? Yelan's eyes narrowed, an arrow already knocked in her bow, pointed directly at Luo Qing. Please, give me some credit, Luo Qing replied nonchalantly. If I'd orchestrated this, do you really think I'd be sitting here, waiting to be caught? He didn't bother turning to look at Yelan, his gaze fixed instead on the small blonde figure down below, who was trying rather poorly to sneak away from the chaos. A sudden thought struck him, and he pointed towards the blonde girl and her floating companion. Hey, look at that person. Blonde hair, sneaking around clearly not from here. Looks super suspicious, don't you think? Maybe you should investigate. Yelan followed his gaze and did see a pair of figures stealthily attempting to slip past the Millelith. But Luo Qing still looked suspicious, and she didn't want to let him off just like that. Torn, she hesitated, unsure of what to do. I'll be back. Your innocence isn't proven yet, Yelan said finally, trusting her instincts. With a swift leap, she vanished into the forest, pursuing the fleeing figures below. Chapter 25, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 25. On Yujing Terrace, a sea of people gathered as the Millelith began carefully inspecting each visitor attending the Rite of Dissension. Lumen and Paimon exchanged a few hurried words, seemingly realizing the gravity of the situation, and decided to sneak away through the crowd, an action that did not escape Luo Qing's notice as he observed from his perch. Luo Qing couldn't help but wonder why Lumen felt the need to flee so stealthily. Every year, many foreigners came to watch the rite, and while the Millelith weren't the most competent guards, they were hardly indiscriminate. Lumen's actions would only draw suspicion. Unsurprisingly, the Millelith noticed Lumen's attempt to slip away. That's the traveler. Came a lively, enthusiastic voice from behind Luo Qing. Turning, he found Child standing there, having arrived unnoticed. Indeed, Lord Tartaglia. She has close ties with the Enmo Archon in Mondstadt and has come to Liyue to seek out the Geo Archon. Befriending her might just lead you to Morix's whereabouts, Luo Qing replied nonchalantly, taking a sip of his bubble tea. He'd known Child was hiding nearby, even eavesdropping on his conversation with Yelan. But there was little of value in their chat, so Luo Qing hadn't bothered to intervene. Let's hope your information is accurate, Child said, cracking his knuckles before leaping from his hiding spot. In an impressive display of agility, he landed right in front of the Millelith, intercepting their pursuit of Lumen with a well-placed flying kick to one guard's face. Run! He called to Lumen, who didn't need to be told twice. She darted away, while Child's sudden attack put him face to face with Yelan, who arrived a moment later. Well, what do you think? Who's going to win? Luo Qing asked with amusement, turning to Natalia and the others. Lord Tartaglia, I suppose. Natalia ventured hesitantly. Child was notorious as Snezhnia's #1 berserker, a reputation well known among Fatui recruits. Why aren't they fighting yet? Luo Qing muttered in disappointment, watching the tense standoff between Child and Yelan below. He'd come all the way here for the show, after all. It would be such a letdown if nothing exciting happened. The standoff didn't last long. Yelan was the first to move, attempting to bypass Child to go after Lumen. But Child reacted instantly, summoning a hydro bow and firing a quick arrow to block her path. Forced to engage, Yelan retaliated with her own water-based attacks, leading to an intense battle between two hydro archers. As Natalia had predicted, Child's raw strength gave him the edge, and before long, he found an opportunity to break away and escape. Having fulfilled his objective of aiding Lumen's retreat, Child saw no need to press for a conclusive victory. Well, that's that. Let's head back, Luo Qing said with a nod, standing up. He'd seen what he needed to, and there was no reason to stick around. He planned to visit Zhongli at the Wangsheng funeral parlor later, perhaps to fish and discuss how best to play Child. After bypassing the Millelith guards surrounding Yujing Terrace, Luo Qing and his group descended the mountain from the opposite side. Just as he was about to grant his subordinates a well-earned break before heading to Wangsheng, a squad of Millelith soldiers appeared, blocking their path. You there? Did you see a blonde-haired girl and her floating companion run this way? The squad leader asked urgently. Luo Qing looked at the squad leader with a sudden spark of excitement, raising his voice dramatically. Officer! You've come to the right person. Where did she go? The squad leader asked, his hopes rising. Well, funny thing. I didn't see her at all. +1 frustration from Zhang Deshui. The leader's face darkened, and he glanced at Natalia and the others foreigners with blonde hair and blue eyes. His expression hardened, and he motioned for his men to surround Luo Qing's group. I have reason to believe you are connected to the suspect who attacked the Geo Archon. You'll be coming with us to the Ministry of Civil Affairs, he declared seriously. Excuse me. Luo Qing was genuinely taken aback. This guy's really throwing accusations around like it's second nature. The suspect had blonde hair, and so do you. If you have any objections, you can bring them up at the ministry, Zhang Deshui said coldly. Hold on. You Liyue people are going too far. We are employees of Snezhnia's Northland Bank. Falsely accusing us could lead to a diplomatic incident. Natalia snapped, her frustration boiling over. Igor and Sergei moved to shield Luo Qing, ready for a confrontation. Snezhnians. That only makes you more suspicious. I advise you to come quietly, Zhang Deshui responded, his prejudices flaring. Recent troubles in Liyue had often involved the Fatui, and Zhang Deshui felt justified in his caution. You dare! Sergei growled, stepping forward to confront the Millilith. Stand down, Sergei. Let me handle this, Luo Qing said, placing a calming hand on Sergei's shoulder. He stepped up to Zhang Deshui, their gazes locking. Are you certain you want to drag us to the ministry? Luo Qing asked coolly. Do you think you have a choice? Zhang Deshui retorted. Ugh, Luo Qing grimaced in distaste before suddenly shouting over Zhang's shoulder, Miss Ganyu. We're innocent, I swear. Not far away, Ganyu, who was overseeing the effort to calm the crowd, heard someone calling her name. She turned to see a black-haired young man waving desperately at her, his face a picture of exaggerated distress. Ganyu couldn't ignore a cry for help. After giving a few instructions to her fellow secretaries, she walked over to investigate. What's going on here? She asked gently, glancing at the Millilith soldiers surrounding Luo Qing's group. Seeing that Ganyu didn't recognize him, Luo Qing figured it wouldn't matter. He grabbed her hand, his face a picture of exaggerated despair as he wailed, tears streaming down his face. Miss Ganyu. We're just honest business people, but these officers are accusing us of being connected to the attack on the Geo Archon. We're innocent. We don't have the power to harm the Archon. Luo Qing felt like his acting skills had reached a new peak. He was practically Oscar-worthy. Is that true? Ganyu asked, frowning at Zhang Deshui. Zhang Deshui's expression twisted. Why didn't I notice Ganyu was nearby? If I'd known, I'd have never risked such a rash arrest. Ganyu was a respected figure in Liyue, having served since the days Morix himself founded the nation. Though technically a secretary to the Qixing, her status far surpassed even the most senior among them. The Qixing came and went, but the secretary was eternal. Miss Ganyu, they are from Snezhnia, which is why we found them suspicious. Zhang Deshui tried to explain. Oh, so all Snezhnians are criminals, hey? And just a moment ago, you said it was because my subordinates were blonde, just like your suspect. Now you're changing your story. Luo Qing interrupted, his tone sharp and accusatory. He rearranged his expression into a perfect imitation of wounded innocence before turning back to Ganyu. Miss Ganyu, this man is simply too unreasonable. T/N, wait, is he not blonde? Was I frigging tricked? Did I read it wrong? Why am I translating this at midnight? Chapter 26, this Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 26. If there's no solid evidence, you really can't just arrest people without cause. Focus on tracking down the real suspect, and don't make this kind of mistake again. Ganyu's expression was apologetic as she addressed Zhang Deshui and his men. Why yes, Miss Ganyu. Though Zhang was still frustrated with Luo Qing and his group, he couldn't afford to contradict Ganyu. Taking the chance she'd offered them, the Millilith squad quickly retreated to continue their investigation. Miss Ganyu, thank you so much. Luo Qing feigned deep gratitude as he eagerly shook Ganyu's hand. The adeptus, slightly flustered by the contact, gently pulled her hand away with a polite smile. You're from Snezhnia? She asked. Yes, we're all upstanding citizens working for Northland Bank. Luo Qing declared with enthusiasm. Ganyu remained puzzled by how this obviously Liyue-blooded man claimed to be from Snezhnia, and how he seemed to know her. But she kept her tone gentle. Things have been a bit unstable recently. I hope you can forgive any inconvenience caused, she said. Oh, it's no trouble at all, not when Miss Ganyu is here. Luo Qing replied smoothly. Well, if that's all, I still have other duties to attend to. Please excuse me, Ganyu said with a polite nod before turning to leave. The moment Ganyu was out of sight, Luo Qing's 3 subordinates could no longer contain themselves. Natalia was the first to speak. Luo Qing, do you like that adeptus? She asked with curiosity. Hey? What makes you say that? Luo Qing responded, puzzled. Just now, when you shook her hand, your eyes were practically glowing, Igor teased. You don't get it, that was all an act, to win her sympathy, Luo Qing said dismissively. Pfft, sure, Sergei scoffed. You were practically drooling. That's nonsense. I did it on purpose. Luo Qing shot back indignantly. Meanwhile, not long after walking away, Ganyu had calmed down. Yet, she sensed a familiar aura lingering in the air, an aura that reminded her of that night in the bath when the window blew open. She carefully scanned her surroundings but found nothing out of place. Raising her hand, the aura intensified, and she realized it was coming from her own fingers. Bringing them to her nose, she took a hesitant sniff. Her adeptus blood granted her senses far sharper than any mortal's, capable of picking up even the faintest sense. In the crowd earlier, the mingling of people had masked it, but now, alone, she recognized it. That scent. The realization hit her. That night wasn't a fatigue-induced delusion. Someone really had burst into the bath, seen her and Yeo, and left just as swiftly. That person was him? Ganyu's face flushed a deep red. She glanced back towards where Luo Qing and his companions had stood, only to find them gone. What should I do? She looked in the direction they had left, hesitated, then turned back towards Yujing Terrace, bouncing slightly on her toes. She wanted to go back and confront Luo Qing, but with the Archon's death, the Ministry of Civil Affairs was in chaos. Her workload was overwhelming, and she couldn't leave her post. I heard he works at Northland Bank, maybe I'll find him there later. Resolving herself, Ganyu took a deep breath and hurried back to her duties. Elsewhere. Despite the little hiccup, Luo Qing's plans continued undisturbed. He dismissed Natalia and the others, giving them some free time, before heading to Wangsheng funeral parlor. As he stepped inside, he saw Zhongli calmly seated at a table, sipping tea and reading a book, seemingly unperturbed by the news of the Geo Archon's demise. Hey there, Luo Qing. Off to fish with Mr. Zhongli again? By the way, did you attend the Rite of Dissension today? Hu Tao's curious voice greeted him from behind the counter. Ever since Luo Qing had started inviting Zhongli to go fishing every other day, he and Hu Tao had become quite familiar with each other. I did. Why do you ask? Luo Qing replied, intrigued. So it's true? The Geo Archon really died? Hu Tao's eyes sparkled with excitement as she leaned closer to him. Luo Qing hesitated, glancing at Zhongli, who remained composed and focused on his tea. I mean, he looked pretty dead to me. Why are you asking, though? Isn't it obvious? Hu Tao replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Wangsheng Funeral Parlor is the best in Liyue when it comes to funeral services. Isn't it only right that we handle such a significant send-off? It dawned on Luo Qing. You want to be the one to send off the Geo Archon. Zhongli's hand paused, his teacup hovering mid-sip, and his eyes briefly flickered toward them. Then he resumed drinking, turning a page in his book as if nothing was amiss. Who else would be better at such a job? When it comes to funerals, no one does it better than us. Hu Tao stated confidently. You really are something, Hu Tao. Luo Qing chuckled. Humph. Of course. Hu Tao tossed her pigtails, clearly pleased with herself. Back in the day, when Grandpa was in charge, we even hosted the rite of parting for the adepti. Let me guess, but it's not like that now. Luo Qing teased with a grin. Hey! We're not declining. We're conserving our strength for a big comeback. Hu Tao pouted, puffing out her cheeks in irritation. Maybe I should have a chat with Ningguang the next time I see her, Luo Qing suggested. Put in a good word for you to handle the Geo Archon's farewell ceremony. Really? You'd do that for us? Hu Tao's eyes sparkled with hope. Not a chance, Luo Qing said bluntly. +1 frustration from Hu Tao. Humph. You and Zhongli can go fishing then, I've got business to take care of, she snapped, sticking her tongue out at Luo Qing before turning away. With a quick farewell to Zhongli, she dashed out the door. Even with Zhongli away, other staff remained to manage the funeral parlor, so there wasn't much to worry about. Once Hu Tao left, Zhongli set down his cup, made brief eye contact with Luo Qing, then silently went upstairs to fetch his fishing rod. Under the Liyue bridge, Luo Qing and Zhongli sat on one of the stone supports, rods in hand, eyes fixed on the rippling water. "Mr. Zhongli, our dear Lord Tartaglia will probably be coming to see you soon. Don't forget to string him along," Luo Qing said, grinning. "I have my own methods, Mr. Luo Qing. There's no need for concern," Zhongli responded calmly. "Good. By the way, did you stay to watch the scene unfold at Yujing Terrace today?" Luo Qing asked. "There are wise individuals among the Kixing. To avoid complications, I returned here to Wangsheng as soon as I cast off my guise, making no unnecessary moves. Pity you missed it. You should have seen it, so many people were crying their hearts out. They cursed the would-be assassin's entire lineage." Luo Qing's hand flourished dramatically as he exaggerated the story. "Humans will continue their lineage, but as an ancient god of a bygone era, even I am destined to fade one day. I cannot protect Liyue forever. This day was inevitable. Liyue must learn to stand on its own," Zhongli mused, eyes fixed on the bobbing line in the water. Luo Qing's theatrics couldn't shake him. Zhongli's thoughts were far away, contemplating Liyue's future as he watched the currents below. Fishing, it seemed, was quite a pleasant pastime. He'd have to make it a habit. Chapter 27, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 27. Evening, Northland Bank. Luo Qing returned to Northland Bank, carrying a fishing rod in one hand and a basket of fish in the other. He'd spent the afternoon fishing with Zhongli, and the results had been exceptional. His face brimmed with pride. Anyone passing by could expect him to boast about his haul. Stepping into the bank's lobby, he spotted a certain blonde girl and her floating companion chatting with Tartaglia. Drawn by his ever-present curiosity and love for a good drama, Luo Qing sauntered over, fishing rod casually slung over his shoulder. "So, you want us to find those, adepti, right?" Paimon scratched her head, trying to understand Tartaglia's intentions. "To clear our names, and, hey, who's this?" The little floating companion's confusion grew as she noticed the dark-haired man standing in front of them, staring at her with a curious expression. "Hey? How did you know I caught 17 fish in 2 hours today?" Luo Qing asked, tilting his head. "Wah?" Paimon's face was a picture of bewilderment. "Is he a friend of yours?" Lumen asked, turning to Tartaglia with a questioning glance. He's also one of the Harbingers," Tartaglia replied with a slightly strained smile, silently hoping Luo Qing wouldn't derail his plans. Though he's still just a trainee and hasn't been officially given a code name yet. "I'm Luo Qing. Nice to meet you." Luo Qing grinned at Lumen and Paimon. "I've heard a lot about the two of you. Maybe we can go fishing together sometime." You really seem to like fishing," Paimon observed. "Of course. Freshly caught fish make the best grilled meals," Luo Qing said cheerfully. Well, if we get the chance, we could try it out. Lumen's actually pretty good at fishing," Paimon declared with a proud nod. Lumen shot Paimon a warning look, "Please don't drag me into this." Staring at Luo Qing's features, Paimon suddenly looked puzzled. "Wait, you said you're with the Fatui, but you look like someone from Liyue." "That's because I'm a Liyue defector," Luo Qing replied with a nonchalant shrug. "Defector? What's that mean?" Paimon asked, thoroughly confused. "He just likes to spout nonsense," Tartaglia interrupted, exasperated. "Don't pay him any mind. He grew up in Snezhnia. His only connection to Liyue is through his bloodline." "Oh. I see." Paimon nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Since he's also a Harbinger, there's no need to hide anything." "But why are you helping us?" Lumen asked, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned her attention back to Tartaglia. "Because..." Tartaglia started to explain, but Luo Qing jumped in before he could finish. "To stir things up," Luo Qing said, grinning. +1 frustration from Tartaglia. "Stir things up." Lumen's gaze grew complicated as she glanced between the two. She had suspected that the Fatui wouldn't help them out of pure goodwill. "But you don't have much of a choice," Luo Qing continued casually. "Your wanted posters are plastered all over Liyue. Step out on the streets, and I guarantee someone will turn you into the Millilith for the bounty." He paused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. If you go through the usual channels at the Ministry of Civil Affairs, even if you are innocent, you'll be detained first, then have to wait for a lawyer, argue your case, and eventually be proven innocent. That whole process. At least 6 months, minimum. So you see, you really only have one option going to Jueyun Karst, he concluded with a casual shrug. But we didn't do anything. We're not the ones who killed the Geo Archon. Paimon protested, stomping her little feet in frustration. Well, that's a question for you too, Luo Qing replied nonchalantly. Why did you try to sneak away back then? If you'd just stayed put and let them question you, they would have released you in a few hours. Lumen turned to Paimon with a flat stare. If Paimon hadn't panicked and made things sound so dramatic, Lumen doubted she'd have tried to flee. I was scared, okay. Paimon admitted, her voice small and embarrassed. She then put on her most pleading expression. But we're friends, right? Friends forgive each other, don't they? Anyway, Luo Qing interrupted with a smirk, the sooner you meet the Adepti, the sooner you clear your names. They've held authority in Liyue since the founding. Their word counts for a lot. Luo Qing gave them a friendly wave and added, I've got fish to grill. Until next time. Despite being Tartaglia's subordinate, Luo Qing had a habit of stealing the spotlight, and he figured he'd better let Tartaglia handle the rest without overshadowing him completely. After saying his farewells, he returned to his room to put away the fish and rod. As he gazed out towards the coastline, he stretched and spoke over his shoulder. Igor, I remember you specialized in intel gathering back in training, right? Luo Qing asked without turning around. Yes, Lord Luo Qing. Why do you ask? Igor responded, stepping forward. I have a job for you. Did you see the blonde girl downstairs just now? Luo Qing asked. The one speaking with Lord Tartaglia. Igor confirmed. Exactly. Luo Qing nodded. From now on, you're to track her movements and report back to me regularly. Now that Lumen was officially in Liyue, the story arc for the region was unfolding. As someone who had knowledge of future events, Luo Qing needed to keep tabs. He didn't want to be caught unawares if Osial suddenly appeared while he was fishing under a bridge. Monitoring Lumen's activities would give him a good idea of how far along the plot had progressed. Lord Luo Qing, isn't she the famous traveler from Mondstadt? She's very powerful. What if she spots me? Igor asked, a bit hesitant. No worries. If you get caught, just tell her that Tartaglia ordered it. Just don't mention my name, Luo Qing instructed with a wave. And if I do mention your name? Igor asked cautiously. If you do, Luo Qing said, stepping closer to Igor with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, you and Sergei can go dance a naked jig at Yujing Terrace. Sergei, who had been standing guard at the door, looked utterly bewildered. +1 frustration from Igor. +1 frustration from Sergei. All right, that's settled, Luo Qing said, giving Igor a pat on the shoulder before turning to Sergei. Is the boat still docked at the usual spot? It's right where you left it, Lord Luo Qing. Are you heading to Gyun Stone Forest again tonight? Sergei asked. Yeah, got some time to kill, might as well have some fun, Luo Qing replied with a yawn. Stretching once more, he vaulted over the balcony, landing nimbly on the ground below. He headed towards the street stalls, picking up a bag of snacks before strolling leisurely to the docks. Chapter 28, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 28. It was hard to say whether it was just in a god's nature to be temperamental or if Osial was extra irritable after being suppressed beneath the ocean for millennia. Whatever the reason, all Luo Qing had to do was taunt him a bit to wring out a solid 10 points of frustration. And with Osial immobilized, pinned under the weight of a geospear beneath the sea, no matter how many friendly greetings Luo Qing offered, there was absolutely nothing Osial could do in retaliation. Truly, a perfect RBQ, a frustration generator. So, every so often, Luo Qing would make a trip to Gyun Stone Forest to siphon off a little more frustration value from Osial. Under the cover of night, Luo Qing boarded a small skiff moored at the port and set sail for Gyun. Incidentally, the boat actually belonged to Teresa, the Electro-Chechen mage stationed at Gyun Stone Forest. But since she worked year-round without leave, the boat was barely used and she had no problem lending it to Luo Qing. In exchange, Luo Qing would always bring her some treats whenever he visited. The little boat's oars cut gently through the night-darkened waves, trailing a pale, silvery wake behind them. After some time, Luo Qing arrived at Gyun. Meanwhile, Teresa had moved her tiny camp closer to the edge of Gyun that faced Liyue harbor, ensuring she'd be able to spot any boats approaching from afar. She'd had to clear out a whole hilly churl camp to claim the spot, completely wiping them out. That night, like every other, Teresa had finished documenting the day's observations and was sitting by the shore, staring out toward Liyue. She rested her chin in her hands, a faint smile on her lips. Not long after, she saw a thin white line stretching out over the water, a small skiff riding the waves and heading her way. Teresa leapt up excitedly and waved toward the boat. A short while later, the skiff docked. Luo Qing emerged from the cramped boat, carrying a large paper-wrapped package. "Lord Luo Qing, you're finally here. I missed you so much." Teresa rushed over, grabbing the package from his hands and tearing open a corner. The delicious aroma inside wafted out immediately. "Come on, you just missed the food, didn't you?" Luo Qing teased, eyeing her playful expression. "Hee, same difference." Teresa settled back in her camp, still hugging the paper bundle, and opened a smaller packet within a steaming portion of mora meat. The tiny skiff had a terrible ride quality, and after the rough trip over, Luo Qing decided to rest for a bit before greeting Osial. He sat beside Teresa, waiting for her to finish eating. "Haven't had dinner, hey?" he asked. "Well, I just had a feeling you'd show up tonight, so I saved room." Teresa answered with a cheeky grin. "Sure, let's pretend it's not because you stuffed your face as soon as the supplies arrived and had to ration the rest," Luo Qing replied with a smirk. "Ugh, Teresa blushed in embarrassment, her cheeks puffed out as she chewed on her mouth full of mora meat. After a moment, she changed the subject. "None of that matters. Lord Luo Qing, I'll be leaving this awful place soon." Teresa's excitement bubbled over as she glanced in the direction of Liyue harbor. She'd initially come to Liyue thinking she'd get to work in the bustling port city. Instead, she'd been banished to this god-forsaken corner of the world all by herself. The days had worn her down to the brink of despair. "They're transferring you back?" Luo Qing asked. "Yes. Lord Tartaglia said he's gathering all the forward squads stationed around Liyue harbor for a big operation. I was selected." Teresa nearly bounced with excitement. "A big operation?" Luo Qing raised an eyebrow. "Hey? Lord Luo Qing, aren't you also a harbinger? Didn't Lord Tartaglia tell you about it?" Teresa asked, confused. "Oh, we handle different tasks, so our information doesn't overlap," Luo Qing waved off her question, not mentioning that he was technically under Tartaglia's command. "A guy's gotta have some pride, after all." "Hee, well, Lord Luo Qing, when I'm back in Liyue harbor, I'll treat you to dinner. I already did my research, Liyue Pavilion, Zinyu Kiosk, you name it." "Sure, we'll see," Luo Qing replied with a noncommittal shrug, though his thoughts churned over the significance of this big operation. Ever since Tartaglia arrived, Luo Qing's role had become somewhat awkward. Aside from Tartaglia and the lady, he outranked every other Fatui in Liyue. Yet, both Tartaglia and the lady had their own agendas, leaving Luo Qing as a sort of go-between, caught in the middle. The lady had vanished after their last meeting with Zhongli, supposedly heading to Inajima, while Tartaglia clearly intended to secure the Geo Archon's Gnosis on his own without collaborating. In essence, Luo Qing had been sidelined. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had the luxury of spending so much time fishing with Zhongli. A collective Fatui operation. There seemed to be only one possible context for that. Luo Qing glanced at Teresa, who was furiously devouring her mora meat, and slipped into thought. Looks like I need to start building up my own faction. "Lord Luo Qing, what did you say?" Teresa asked, mouth full. "Nothing. Eat up, it's time to get moving," Luo Qing replied. "Oh, all right." Just like before, Luo Qing dove alone into the depths of the sea, leaving Teresa on the shore to keep watch. Using a teleportation array, he descended to the underwater prison and soon came face to face with the familiar sight of Osial. With the seal of forbidden knowledge no longer assisting him, Osial didn't even have the strength to respond. He could only glare helplessly as Luo Qing approached. "Hey, Osial, it's been a while," Luo Qing greeted cheerfully, holding a powerful spray can, his smile wide and insincere. "I remember saying last time we'd be working on a new masterpiece, right?" Osial's only response was a furious fluttering of his eyes, the only way he could express his frustration. Plus 10 frustration from Osial. Oh, that's right, today we're painting the chicken plays ball piece, aren't we? Osial remained silent, but his angry glares spoke volumes. With a graceful leap, Luo Qing landed on Osial's massive body and shook the spray can. He got to work immediately. By now, Osial's once pristine scales were a patchwork of graffiti, each scrawl a testament to Luo Qing's artistic talents, including the infamous "I was here" and a huge, pitiful character meaning defeat. Each new stroke earned another 10 points of frustration in Luo Qing's mental tally. How else could he rack up frustration points this easily? Osial was truly his golden goose. Soon enough, the chicken plays ball scene was complete. Luo Qing hopped back to face Osial's primary head, giving it a friendly pat. All right, all done. Now, time for today's lesson. Luo Qing pulled out a well-worn notebook, flipping through the pages with a mock-serious expression. Last time, we covered the 10 rules of elementary student conduct. Today, we'll move on to the 21 rules for middle school behavior. Plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 frustration from Osial. Osial's many eyes blinked furiously, a desperate plea flashing in the Morse-like pattern. Li Fiyun, when I'm free, I will crush you to dust. Not even your ashes will remain. Chapter 29, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 29. Just before dawn, Luo Qing finally decided he'd tormented Osial enough and returned to the shore. After making plans with Teresa to meet up in Liyue harbor someday, he set course back to the city. Following several bouts of harassing Osial, he'd accumulated a total of 2,051 frustration points, enough for 2 sets of 10 draws. Still, knowing that 20 draws likely wouldn't yield any big rewards, he planned to save up a little more, maybe enough for 4 or 5 sets before making a go at it. By the time he got back to the Northland Bank, the sun had risen. As soon as he entered the lobby, he spotted Child and Natalia standing at the front, clearly waiting for him. Natalia waved him over with a knowing look in her eyes. Luo Qing approached, sensing he was about to get an earful. He glanced at Natalia's expression and then turned to Child. Lord Child, is there something you needed from me? Where did you run off to? Your secretary and I have been waiting for you all night, Child said, arms crossed and a slight tiredness visible in his eyes. Oh, just a little night fishing. Why? Were you interested in joining, Lord Child? Plus 1 frustration from Tartaglia. I swear, you're supposed to be a trainee harbinger, but all you think about is fishing, Child said, exasperated. He wore an expression of utter disappointment. Back when he'd been chosen as a trainee, Child had traveled all across Teyvat. If he wasn't fighting, he was on his way to another fight, grabbing every opportunity to boost his reputation and move up the ranks as fast as possible. How could Luo Qing be so casual? Didn't he want to become the 12th Harbinger, earn a code name, and gain the honor of meeting the Tsaritsa? Didn't he find the prospect thrilling? Ah, I was just getting bored, Luo Qing replied casually, chuckling. Well, here's something to keep you occupied. Child smirked, a hint of mischief in his eyes. The power extracted from the replicated sigils in the research camp isn't sufficient. Our scouts recently found a new Adeptus domain, and it's said to contain many Adeptus mechanisms with a large amount of stored energy. I've been asked to send someone to escort the recovery team, but I'm swamped with other matters. So, you want me to go? Smart as always, Child said with a teasing smile. Luo Qing was at a loss for words. So Child was the type to boss others around. Where is it? Jueyun Karst. If you're lucky, you might even run into that traveler from last night, Child chuckled. Jueyun Karst, hey. Luo Qing's brow furrowed slightly. The journey to and from that area would take at least a month, a rather long haul. Can I skip it? He asked hopefully. Nope. Jueyun Karst, northwest direction. Several weeks later, the group finally neared their destination. The iron rule of Snezhnia was to follow orders, and Luo Qing had no choice but to do as Child said. He accompanied Avilia's research team to Jueyun Karst, where they aimed to retrieve the Adeptus mechanisms hidden within a supposed abandoned domain. Since the journey would take a long time, Luo Qing left Natalia and Sergei behind in Liyue harbor to keep tabs on the latest movements of the Qixing and gather intel. They would report back once he returned. I say, Avilia, are you sure there aren't any Adepti around this domain? Luo Qing asked. Unlike the picturesque scenes depicted in the game, the peaks of Jueyun Karst were impossibly numerous and steep. Luo Qing couldn't even tell which peak was Mt Azang and which was Mt Hulao. But he knew one thing for certain: there were quite a few adepti residing in Jueyun Karst. While they had a few seals of forbidden knowledge, this mission was essentially a burglary. If they got caught, Luo Qing wasn't sure he could guarantee the safety of everyone in Avilia's group. If things went south, well, he'd just try to make sure they at least got proper burials. Rest assured, Lord Luo Qing. Our scouts have observed the site for some time. There haven't been any adepti in the vicinity. It's most likely abandoned, Avilia answered respectfully. All right, I'll take your word for it. Luo Qing fell silent, following the group while admiring the scenery of Jueyun Karst. He had to admit, the landscape was breathtaking. Towering stone peaks, connected by wooden bridges and pathways, cranes calling in the distance, it truly felt like an otherworldly paradise. Before long, they arrived at the entrance to the so-called abandoned adepti domain. The domain was hidden behind a waterfall, the water cascading down from the peak of a cloud-piercing mountain before flowing toward Daihua Marsh. They slipped past the edge of the waterfall to find the entrance a massive gate inscribed with golden symbols. Like every adepti abode, it was sealed with a protective array. Luo Qing reached out and touched the gate. The moment his fingers brushed against it, he was pushed back by an invisible force. The doors locked. Got any ideas? Naturally. Lord Luo Qing, please stand back a bit, Avilia said with a nod. He gestured to a soldier carrying a large wooden crate. The soldier approached and opened it, revealing bundles of explosives. Everyone retreated to a safe distance outside the cave, leaving the explosives expert behind to set the charges. A moment later, there was the scratch of a match lighting, and the expert sprinted out of the cave without looking back. A few seconds later, a deafening explosion rocked the mountain. All right, Lord Luo Qing. Let's head in, Avilia said, beaming. Luo Qing was speechless. Were they not worried about attracting the adepti? He followed Avilia and the others inside. The entrance had been blown wide open, the once secure protective array left in tatters. Clearly, the adepti hadn't anticipated anyone attempting such a direct breach. Every adepti domain was its own little pocket realm, and this one was no exception. After navigating through twisting passages, the cave opened up into a vast chamber. Massive floating islands, connected by golden, ribbon-like pathways, hovered in midair. And on each island were various adeptus mechanisms, all of different shapes and sizes, some resembling oversized rice cookers, others like colorful lanterns. Avilia's face lit up with glee at the sight. He wasted no time ordering his men to start packing up the machinery. Luo Qing moved closer, reaching out to touch one of the mechanisms. For some reason, the objects felt oddly familiar to him. Could this be her domain? A complicated expression crossed Luo Qing's face, and he turned to warn Avilia. Avilia, move quickly. This place might not be abandoned. I understand, Lord Luo Qing. Though Avilia's eyes flickered with a trace of reluctance as he glanced at the intricate mechanisms and golden symbols around them, he immediately urged his team to speed up. Time ticked by, and just as Avilia's group was about to finish packing up the last of the energy-filled mechanisms, the sound of footsteps echoed from the cave's entrance, a sharp, steady clicking, like high heels striking stone. Despite the noise of the team's activity, the sound was impossible to ignore. Luo Qing's gaze snapped to the cave's entrance. There, a tall, silver-haired woman with a chest that seemed to embrace the world itself and a long spear in hand walked in with an imposing stride. She wore a half-mask, her white, feather-like sleeves swaying as she moved. Red cords accentuated her figure, tracing her perfect curves. Her slender waist, like that of a water snake, was utterly mesmerizing. Her breathtaking beauty even made the Fatui soldiers pause, unable to tear their eyes away from the sight of her. Hey, don't just stand there gawking. Hurry up and pack everything now. Luo Qing snapped, his voice cutting through the soldiers' daze. Even though it was the first time they'd met after his reincarnation, Luo Qing recognized her instantly, the unique makeup, the icy blue vision. She was unmistakable. The Adeptus disciple, the calamity-warding goddess Shenhe. Shenhe's brows furrowed at the sight of the Fatui invading her master's domain. With a sharp, commanding voice, she shouted, "Who dares trespass in an adepti abode?" With a single push of her toes, she launched herself forward, spear aimed directly at Luo Qing. T/N, please consider Avilia different from the other scientist overall, maybe twins? Ha ha ha. If there are any mistakes, let me know. Chapter 30, this trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 30. Luo Qing quickly summoned his Millilith spear to block Shenhe's attack. He was about to use his silver tongue to convince her to stop, but it was clear that Shenhe had no intention of backing down. Her spear techniques were relentless, chaining one move into the next. Without using elemental power or his spirit speech, Luo Qing found it surprisingly challenging to hold his ground. Lord Luo Qing, should we? Osial hesitated, uncertain whether to aid Luo Qing or retreat. Just go. Don't worry about me. Luo Qing barked his command while fending off Shenhe's assault. I understand, Lord Luo Qing. Osial needed no further urging. Relieved to see Luo Qing's self-sacrifice, he and his team turned and bolted for the cave's entrance. How dare you steal the Adepti's artifacts? You won't get away. Seeing her master's inventions being carried away, Shenhe's rage flared. Ignoring Luo Qing, she pivoted and charged at Osilia's retreating group. Luo Qing moved to intercept, but Shenhe swiftly formed a hand seal. Divine Edict. A talisman burst apart, and a spectral figure resembling Shenhe herself appeared, blocking Luo Qing's path. Oh, come on! Seeing Shenhe poised to impale Osilia with her spear, Luo Qing watched her graceful leap through the air and muttered to himself. Well, you can't blame me for this. He shut his eyes briefly. When they opened, they were glowing with a golden slit pupil light. Sprit speech, time 0. Suddenly, the entire cavern seemed frozen. Everything Shenhe, her spectre, even the very air moved as if in slow motion. Within this domain of time 0, only Luo Qing could move freely. With a swift leap, he closed the distance to Shenhe mid-air. Stretching out his hand, he scooped her up and slung her over his shoulder, sprinting toward the depths of the cave. Meanwhile, Osilia, who had been bracing for Shenhe's strike, was stunned to see both his superior, Luo Qing, and the attacking woman vanish in an instant. The Adepti spectre dissolved into ice crystals. What just happened? Confusion flickered across Osilia's face, but his survival instincts kept him running. After all, this was the domain of an Adeptus, and neither he nor his fellow soldiers stood a chance against such beings. Lord Luo Qing, at least, was a harbinger in training. He should be able to hold his own, right? Deep within the cave, Shenhe felt the world spin around her. A pressure gripped her waist, and before she could react, she was standing face to face with the thief she'd been fighting moments earlier in the deepest part of the cavern. And she was still slung over his shoulder like some maiden captured by a mountain bandit. Scoundrel! A flush rose to Shenhe's cheeks as she drove her knee into Luo Qing's back, breaking free and leaping back. Holding her spear at the ready, she regarded him warily, replaying the events in her mind. She'd been just a moment away from striking down the thieves stealing her master's creations. How had this man suddenly carried her to the back of the cave? There hadn't been any signs of a teleportation formation. She glanced at the cave entrance, knowing that if she wanted to pursue the fleeing intruders, she'd have to deal with this man first. Ghostly soul, follow the decree. With another talisman, Shenhe summoned the spectral figure again, icy energy swirling around her. The spectre and Shenhe both readied their spears, eyes fixed on Luo Qing. The blue glow of her vision flared as a massive surge of cryo-energy enveloped her weapon. Shenhe and the spectre darted in from opposite sides, their spears aimed straight at Luo Qing. Yet, just as they closed in, Shenhe noticed something. Luo Qing's eyes had changed. The originally dark irises had shifted to a searing gold, like molten sunlight. In the next instant, he vanished, reappearing behind her. Her attack had been effortlessly evaded. Shenhe froze, cold fury flashing in her eyes. The red ropes binding her body seemed to tremble, barely holding back the raging bloodlust within her. She's really mad now. Luo Qing thought, feeling a pang of guilt. He hated when women got angry. It was always tricky to handle. One wrong word, and the situation would only escalate. Miss Shenhe, how about we stop fighting for a moment and let me explain? He offered, trying to sound reasonable. Explain? Humph. There's nothing to explain, you rogue. Shenhe's voice dripped with disdain as the cryo-energy around her surged even higher. After exchanging blows twice, she understood that Luo Qing possessed some sort of high-speed movement ability so fast that even her eyes couldn't track him. If her spear couldn't hit him, she'd freeze the entire cave and see where he could hide. She stepped forward, and a concentrated burst of cryo-energy erupted from her. In an instant, everything around Shenhe began to freeze, ice spreading rapidly in all directions. Oh no! She's really using her ultimate move now. Luo Qing winced. This massive cryo attack was going to be troublesome. If he got too close, he'd end up encased in ice. If he retreated, Shenhe might catch up with Avilia's team. Guess it's time to try this. Still within the domain of time zero, Luo Qing flicked his fingers. A tiny spike of geo-energy formed in the shape of a pebble, and he flicked it towards Shenhe's forehead. The force was precisely measured just enough to disrupt her concentration without causing any harm. There was a faint thud. Shenhe's head jerked back, a tiny red mark blooming on her forehead. Her spell fizzled, the spreading ice abruptly halting. You scoundrel! Shenhe's eyes widened at the small rock on the ground before glaring at Luo Qing. +1 frustration from Shenhe. +1 frustration from Shenhe. +1 frustration from Shenhe. This frustration meter was basically an anger gauge. Watching the numbers climb, Luo Qing's heart sank. The way Shenhe was staring at him, it was as if she wanted to crush him into dust. Luo Qing took a deep breath, then spoke in a calm tone. Miss Shenhe, I admit, grabbing your waist was out of line. Can we call it even and be friends now? Shenhe said nothing. Her response was to hurl her spear at him with all her might. Luo Qing sidestepped effortlessly. Missed. Dodged. Easy. The spear clattered to the ground. Shenhe didn't make any move to retrieve it, instead standing still like a sulking child. The two of them just stood there, staring at each other, neither making the next move. Although Shenhe was inherently hot-tempered, it didn't mean she was foolish. Through their brief exchanges, she'd come to realize the truth: this man's strength far exceeded her own. If he truly wanted to, she'd be at his mercy. They remained locked in a silent standoff for a while. Finally, Luo Qing decided enough was enough. He cleared his throat and spoke. Miss Shenhe, I apologize for any offense today. The next time you visit Liyue Harbor, Li Feiyu, will make amends properly. With that, he activated time zero once more and vanished from the cavern. Leaving Shenhe alone, standing in the cave's depths, lost in thought. Chapter 31, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 31. Ayazang Mountain, Adeptus Abode of Cloud Retainer. After lingering alone for a while, Shenhe picked up her spear and returned to the Adeptus Abode she shared with her master. The Cloud Retainer, in her crane form, was tinkering with a small mechanical device, her wings infused with adeptal energy. Sensing Shenhe's return, she continued fiddling with the contraption, her tone casual. You're back? What happened at the storage area? Shenhe glanced at the small mechanism her master was adjusting and lowered her voice. A group of thieves broke into your storage, master. They stole many of your inventions. What? The Cloud Retainer's wings twitched, causing the mechanical parts she was holding with adeptal power to fall to the ground. Her beady eyes widened in fury. How dare some miscreants steal my inventions? It took her a while to calm down. Folding her wings back, she spoke in a gentler tone. Did you encounter them? Yes. I'm sorry, master. Their leader was strong. I couldn't stop them. Forget it. They were just some old artifacts. As long as you weren't hurt, it doesn't matter. Go and rest for now. The Cloud Retainer was about to return to her tinkering when she noticed Shenhe standing still, seemingly lost in thought. Sighing, she set down the mechanism and looked at her disciple with concern. You look troubled. Would you like to tell me what's on your mind? Master. I want to go down the mountain. Down the mountain? The Cloud Retainer blinked, momentarily stunned. She knew Shenhe had once secretly descended the mountain for some unknown reason, only to return shortly after with a troubled expression. Now, she was asking to go down the mountain again, and this time, she was telling her openly. Could it be that her disciple's heart had started to open up? What brought this on all of a sudden? I want to find someone. Shenhe's voice was low, her expression a mix of conflicting emotions: anger, and perhaps a hint of embarrassment. Someone? The thieves who stole from my storage. Yes. The Cloud Retainer nodded slightly, believing she understood Shenhe's motives. Her disciple had always had a fierce nature, and it was likely that she had been bested in a fight and now wanted to reclaim her pride. Did he hurt you? Or perhaps insult you? Tell me, and I shall avenge you. No, neither. Shenhe shook her head. Then what happened? Speak clearly. He grabbed my waist. Several days later. After leaving Jueyun Karst, Luo Qing did not reunite with Avilia's team. Once he confirmed their safe departure, he returned to Liyue on his own. The journey to Jueyun Karst had taken nearly 2 months, most of it spent on the road, a significant waste of time, in Luo Qing's opinion. With all that time, I could have gone fishing with Zhongli a dozen times. Damn it, child, you owe me for this. Finally back in his room, Luo Qing gazed out at the ocean view and spoke calmly. So, Natalia, what's been happening in Liyue while I was away? Lord Luo Qing, Natalia began, ever since the death of the Geo Archon, the Qixing have been consolidating their power. They've nearly taken control of all Liyue's affairs. And she hesitated for a moment before continuing in a lower voice. Rumor has it that the hidden Adepti have also heard of the Archon's death. They're planning to return to Liyue to confront the Qixing. Some of them have already arrived, and they'll likely head to the Jade Chamber soon to demand answers. So, quite a bit happened in these 2 months. Luo Qing muttered, shaking his head. He suddenly noticed that their usual trio was missing a member. Confused, he asked, "Where's Igor? I sent him to keep an eye on that traveler. Why isn't he here to report?" Lord Luo Qing, Igor was discovered a few days ago while monitoring the traveler. He was caught? Did he mention my name? Luo Qing's urgency was palpable. Although his surveillance of Lumen was mainly to keep track of events, it would be difficult to explain his intentions if discovered. No, he didn't. In a panic, he claimed he was a long-time admirer of the traveler and that his strong desires led him to follow and spy on her. The Millilith arrested him for harassment. I think they said he'll be detained for half a month, so he should be out in a few days. Luo Qing's expression grew complicated. Well, that's clever of him, I suppose, he thought, appreciating how Igor had deftly avoided implicating him. I'll have to give him a raise when he gets out. By the way, Lord Luo Qing, that secretary of the Qixing, Ganyu, I believe, came by once while you were away. She seemed to have something she wanted to confirm with you. Ganyu. Luo Qing was puzzled. She didn't recognize me last time we met. Why would she seek me out now? Oh well, I'll deal with that later if we cross paths again. Also, has the traveler returned? Yes, her wanted notice has been withdrawn. It seems the Adepti pressured the Qixing into backing down. Natalia hesitated briefly before continuing. Additionally, the traveler visited Lord Child shortly after her return. They seemed to have made some sort of agreement and even had dinner with your fishing buddy, Zhongli. Got it. Understood. Luo Qing stood, stretching with a yawn. You've all worked hard while I was away. Take a break, I'll handle things from here. With that, he left the room. Since Lumen had already met with Child and Zhongli, it meant they were likely preparing for the rite of parting. Given his close bond with Zhongli, Luo Qing figured he could seamlessly insert himself into their group and interact with Lumen more directly. Heading out, he walked downstairs, turned right, passed through the commercial street's red wooden pavilions, and made another right turn, arriving at the entrance of Wangsheng Funeral Parlor. To find out Zhongli's whereabouts, all he needed to do was ask the head of Wangsheng, Hu Tao. It had been a while, and the Wangsheng Funeral Parlor seemed busier than when Luo Qing had left, with more attendants present. The once nearly empty parlor, home only to Zhongli and Hu Tao, now bustled with activity. Scanning the room, Luo Qing didn't see Hu Tao's distinctive hat and twin ponytails. He pulled aside one of the attendants. "Where's your boss, Hu Tao?" "Lady Hu Tao went to Wuvong Hill recently. She should be back in a few days." "She went to Wuvong Hill." Luo Qing paused, wondering if Hu Tao's legendary quest had begun. But it's too early in the timeline for that. Unable to make sense of it, he decided not to dwell on the matter. Hu Tao would return sooner or later, and then he could ask her directly. Unlike Sumeru, Liyue lacked any advanced communication network. Most people relied on the power of their voices, and it was genuinely hard to contact someone who was away. Leaving Wangsheng, Luo Qing was at a loss, unsure where to find Lumen and the others. He wandered aimlessly through the bustling commercial street, but there was no sign of Lumen's group. Luo Qing was considering returning to Child for information when he heard female voices nearby. Looking up, he saw Ganyu and Shenhe walking side by side, chatting as they approached him. Chapter 32, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 32. Why did you suddenly decide to come down the mountain? Did Cloud Retainer send you? Ganyu asked, concern in her eyes as she glanced at Shenhe. With the death of the Geo Archon, the relationship between the Adepti and the Liyue Qing had grown increasingly strained, and Ganyu, caught between two worlds, was struggling to manage her half-human, half-adeptus existence. No, it wasn't on my master's orders. I came to Liyue to find someone, Shenhe replied. Find someone? Ganyu seemed unable to believe her ears. Traveling alone from Jueyun Karst to Liyue just to find someone, this was something Shenhe would actually do? Taking a deep breath to calm herself, Ganyu asked softly, is he from Liyue? He has black hair, knows how to use a spear, so he's probably from Liyue. What's his name? I think his name is Li Feiyu. MHM. How old is he? Judging by his appearance, he seems to be around my age. And how did you two meet? It was in Jueyun Karst. But why are you asking so many questions, senior sister? Shenhe glanced at Ganyu, sensing something odd about her rapid line of questioning. And no reason. I was just curious. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, Ganyu stammered. She looked around nervously before leaning closer and whispering, but, Shenhe, with matters like this, you must be cautious. Don't rush into anything. Shenhe paused, thinking deeply. Getting revenge and cutting down her foe with her spear was something that couldn't be rushed, she reasoned. That man was strong, she needed to take her time and plan carefully. I understand, senior sister. I'll think it through before taking action. Good. Ganyu was relieved to hear Shenhe's agreement. Shenhe had a fierce temperament and was easily impulsive. The fact that she was willing to come down the mountain to find someone showed remarkable self-restraint, but in matters of men and women, one couldn't be too careful lest she fall for someone untrustworthy. Thinking this over, Ganyu hesitated for a moment before asking softly, by the way, does Cloud Retainer know about this? I informed my master of my purpose before leaving. Ganyu's eyes widened in surprise. She agreed. Shenhe looked puzzled. Why wouldn't she, senior sister? If my master hadn't agreed, I wouldn't be here, would I? Well, you're right, Ganyu muttered, feeling slightly embarrassed for prying too much. It's best to wait until Shenhe finds that man, then I'll help her judge if he's worthy. Although tensions between the Adepti and Liyue were high, Ganyu decided it was necessary to make sure Shenhe was settled properly in Liyue before she returned to her duties at Yujing Terrace. As she pondered whether to take Shenhe to Bubu Pharmacy for some king's and tea, a familiar scent caught her attention, a scent she recognized from that night when someone had intruded while she and Yeyeo were bathing. Luo Qing's scent. He's nearby. Startled, Ganyu's eyes darted around, but there was no sign of Luo Qing. She had previously tried to find him at the Northland Bank during a rare moment of free time, only to be told by his subordinates that he was away on official business and currently not in Liyue. She had no choice but to drop the matter then. But now, suddenly catching a whiff of his scent on the street, did that mean he was back? It wasn't that she had to confront him. It was just that he saw both her and Yeyeo completely exposed. That can't just be forgotten. Seeing Ganyu's anxious searching, Shenhe asked curiously, Senior sister, are you also looking for someone? Why yes, but it seems he's already gone. It's nothing. Let's move on. All right. After another quick scan of the surroundings to ensure there was no sign of Luo Qing, Ganyu led Shenhe towards Bubu Pharmacy. Meanwhile, on a nearby rooftop, Luo Qing was lying low, hiding on the roof tiles. He only let out a sigh of relief when he saw Ganyu and Shenhe leave. Running into Ganyu wouldn't have been a big deal, she was likely only looking for him because of something involving Ning Guang. It wouldn't have been too awkward. But Shenhe was a different story. He never expected that just as he returned from Jueyun Karst, Shenhe would show up in Liyue. According to the storyline's timeline, it wasn't yet time for her to leave the mountains. Was she really here to settle a score with him? Or did she want him to take responsibility? He recalled that Liyue's social norms were somewhat conservative. Yikes! Either way, Luo Qing decided it would be best to delay any formal encounter with Shenhe for now. Maybe if she couldn't find him, she'd eventually give up and go back. After wandering aimlessly for a while longer, Luo Qing still hadn't managed to find Lumen and her group. Left with no other choice, he left Liyue Harbor and headed for the research camp to see Child. According to Natalia, Child had been spending a lot of time at the camp recently, supervising Ovilia and her team as they replicated the delusion research. As the person in charge, he was sure to know where Lumen and the others were. Since Yelan's discovery of the camp's previous location, Avilia had moved it under cover of night. The new site was supposedly so hidden that even if the entire Qixing searched together, they'd never find it. Being the third in command of the Fatui in Liyue did have its perks. Luo Qing knew the location of every Fatui hideout in the city, including the research camp. Before long, he arrived at the camp, and as expected, Child was there. Seeing Luo Qing unexpectedly show up at the research camp, Child couldn't resist a playful jab. Well, look who's here. I thought you'd be off fishing now that you're finally back. Luo Qing glanced at the camp, taking note of the stolen mechanisms and the delusion prototypes scattered around. Pretending to be indifferent, he chuckled. Couldn't find my fishing buddy, so I came to ask if you knew where Zhongli was. I knew I shouldn't have expected more from you, Child sighed, shaking his head. For a moment, he'd hoped Luo Qing had come to help with his plans, but it turned out he was only here to ask about Zhongli so they could go fishing together. Zhongli is at Daihua Marsh. He won't be back anytime soon. Daihua Marsh. Luo Qing thought back, piecing together the timeline. It must have been because Zhongli was gathering some wild glaze lilies. All right, thanks, Child. Good night. I'm heading back to sleep. Having gotten the information he wanted, Luo Qing turned to leave, but Child's voice called him back, suddenly serious. Tell me, why do you keep seeking out Zhongli? Is it really just to go fishing? Luo Qing glanced back at Child, puzzled. Did he suspect something? Yes, Luo Qing replied casually, Zhongli has a lot of patience, and he's got good luck too. He's a great fishing companion. What's wrong with that? Seeing Child's skepticism, Luo Qing's tone turned more earnest as he gestured to the delusions on the synthesis table. But Child, are you seriously planning to release it? Liyue is a harbor city. If it goes wild, the casualties could be unimaginable. That's a last resort, Child said with a dismissive wave. Besides, why worry? This world belongs to the strong. If they can't survive a wave, then they're weak. And the weak, well, they deserve their fate. Wow, only you could say something like that with a straight face. Luo Qing gave a half-hearted shrug and walked away from the camp. Chapter 33, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 33. Daihua Marsh was far from Liyue Harbor, requiring a long journey. Considering that even if he went, there was no guarantee he'd find Zhongli, Luo Qing decided not to waste his time traveling there. Instead, after leaving the research camp, he headed straight back to Liyue. As he passed beneath a cliff, a bird call echoed in the air, causing Luo Qing to stop in his tracks. He looked towards the undergrowth beneath the steep cliffside and called out. I can see you. Come on out. At his words, a group of people emerged from the bushes. Each of them held tools like hoes and scythes, while some had bottles of various potions strapped to their waists. Since you spotted us, there's no point beating around the bush, said a burly man who towered over Luo Qing, hefting a hoe menacingly. Hand over your toll money, kid. Luo Qing didn't rush to make a move. He calmly eyed the treasure hoarder's attire and asked casually, you do realize that Liyue Harbor is just a short distance from here, right? Aren't you worried about the Millelith finding you? Ha! The Millelith have their hands full right now. They don't have time to bother with us, the leader sneered. You look like a merchant, so hand over your mora. Otherwise, don't blame us for getting rough. Well, all right then. Luo Qing sighed and shook his head slightly. Just as he was about to use his word of spirit to send the treasure hoarders packing, the sound of rapid footsteps came from behind him. He turned to see a familiar girl with long, flowing blue hair running towards him. In her hand, she summoned an ice arrow and shot it directly at the treasure hoarders. The ice arrow scattered, freezing the hoarders' feet to the ground, leaving them immobilized. Are you all right, sir? Oh. Luo Qing. Ganyu's eyes widened in surprise, clearly not expecting to see Luo Qing there. She had been some distance away and had only seen a group of people being ambushed. In a rush, she'd hurried over to help, never imagining that the person being targeted was Luo Qing. Ganyu. Miss Ganyu, what a coincidence, Luo Qing stammered. Ganyu blushed, unsure of what to say. The memory of Luo Qing possibly seeing her unclothed flitted through her mind, causing her face to heat up and turn a deep shade of red. Despite her centuries-long life, Ganyu's shy and reserved nature had never changed. Though she was technically the one wronged, her demeanor now resembled that of a bashful girl. With Ganyu embarrassed and Luo Qing standing motionless, the two simply stared at each other. Neither noticed as the frozen treasure hoarders took advantage of their distraction to make a hasty retreat. After what felt like an eternity, Ganyu finally spoke softly, "Luo Qing, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Miss Ganyu," Luo Qing replied, knowing this moment would come eventually. Whatever Ganyu said next, he was ready to take responsibility. Ganyu hesitated for a moment before asking in a tiny voice, "One night, did you, by any chance, enter my room through the window?" Which, translated, meant, "Luo Qing, that night when Yayao and I were bathing, were you peeking?" Blush. Luo Qing's expression turned solemn. "Miss Ganyu. Let me clarify. No, let me explain. It was an accident. I couldn't control my speed and ended up going in by mistake. I swear, I didn't stay for even a second longer than necessary. I left immediately." "Then, Luo Qing, did you see anything?" Ganyu's voice was barely above a whisper, her face scarlet. "See anything?" Luo Qing's mind involuntarily flashed back to Ganyu in the bathtub, hair loose and cascading down her shoulders, the sight of creamy skin with a hint of pink. Nope. He couldn't go there. Any more thoughts, and little brother would definitely wake up. "No. Miss Ganyu. Luo Qing, swear to the Geo Archon I didn't see a thing," he declared, raising 4 fingers to his forehead in a solemn oath. Ganyu tilted her head and asked, "Really? I swear." "All right then." Seeing his serious expression, Ganyu chose to believe him. She shifted slightly and asked again, "Have you trained with the Adepti? That night, you moved so quickly, even I couldn't react in time." "Well, Miss Ganyu, if you'd like, I can always go slower." "Hey." Ganyu blinked, looking confused. "Ahem, nothing, Luo Qing quickly covered. "I grew up in Snezhnia, and I've never trained with the Adepti." "Oh. I see." Ganyu lowered her head, feeling slightly embarrassed. Seeing Luo Qing's appearance, she had always assumed he was just a Liyue-born employee of the Northland Bank. It never occurred to her that he was originally from Snezhnia. Meanwhile, Luo Qing had his own doubts. Logically, Ningguang and Yelan should have dug up everything about me by now. How does Ganyu not know the details? Is Ningguang really keeping my information this well guarded? Or did they just decide not to tell Ganyu at all? "Miss Ganyu, it's so late, and you're outside the city. Where are you heading?" "I've finished most of my work for now, so I wanted to take a walk," Ganyu replied softly. Luo Qing glanced towards the direction of Kinky village and asked tentatively, "Heading to Daihua Marsh?" Ganyu looked surprised. "Hey? How did you know, Luo Qing? What a coincidence. I happen to be going that way too. Why don't we travel together?" Luo Qing suggested with a smile. I'm not sure." Ganyu hesitated. She had originally planned to travel quickly, even through the night if needed, and she wasn't sure if Luo Qing could keep up. Before she could finish, he cut her off. "If Miss Ganyu refuses, I'll just roll on the ground and refuse to leave." "Well, all right then," she conceded, feeling strangely cornered by his persistence. The journey to Daihua Marsh was long, and Ganyu initially thought that having Luo Qing as company would slow her down. However, Luo Qing's stamina exceeded her expectations. He kept pace with her from morning to night and night to morning, never needing a break. To clarify, this was about walking. What should have been a solitary journey was unexpectedly livelier with Luo Qing's presence. He constantly found ways to make her smile. With his odd remarks and unfamiliar tunes he hummed, neither resembling Liyue's operas nor Mondstadt's ballads. Over time, Ganyu found herself getting used to having him around. Days later, they arrived at Daihua Marsh, a place of tranquil waters and emerald green scenery. "Finally here," Ganyu murmured, standing on a wooden bridge beside a statue of the Seven. She looked out over the clear jade-like waters, a faint smile gracing her lips. It was a rare expression that Luo Qing hadn't seen on her before. Seeing her so at ease, Luo Qing's perception of Ganyu solidified, gentle, reserved, and shy, with a warmth that rarely blossomed into a smile. Yet here in Daihua Marsh, she had finally allowed herself to relax. As they stood there, Ganyu suddenly remembered something and tilted her head, asking, "By the way, Luo Qing, why did you come all the way out here?" With a smile, Luo Qing replied gently, "Just to keep you company, Ganyu." "Hey. Chapter 34, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 34. A blush spread across Ganyu's cheeks, and the head she had just raised lowered slightly once more. Every time she had asked Luo Qing why he was going to Dihua Marsh during their journey, he always answered the same way. Alright, Luo Qing, why do you keep saying that? Because it's the truth. Ugh. I'm not talking to you anymore. Ganyu lowered her head even further and continued walking deeper into the marsh, prompting Luo Qing to quickly follow along. Flirting with her, it's too fun. Dihua Marsh was full of low-lying areas. Aside from the main pathway and small bridges, most of the land was difficult to traverse. Occasionally, monsters would appear on the small islands scattered throughout the marsh. Tall reeds obscured the view, making it easy to stumble into danger if one didn't know the way. Luo Qing trailed behind Ganyu, carefully avoiding the reeds until they suddenly emerged into a clearing. Before them lay a lush green field, where pale blue glaze lilies were blooming in abundance. Is this the place you were talking about, Ganyu? Luo Qing asked. Glaze lilies had once filled all of Dihua Marsh, but after the Archon War, they had become a rarity. The sight of so many growing hidden amidst the reeds surprised him. When I'm feeling troubled, I come here to clear my mind. Did you plant these glaze lilies yourself, Ganyu? How did you know, Luo Qing? I guessed. Smart, hey. Ganyu fell silent and sat down on a clean patch of stone amidst the glaze lilies. She rested her chin on her hands, her small feet pressed together, her long azure hair blending with the soft blue of the flowers creating a scene of unparalleled beauty. Luo Qing stood quietly beside her, unwilling to disturb the tranquility of the moment. If he had a camera on him, he thought, he'd definitely take a secret photo of Ganyu to treasure later. After a while, Ganyu parted her lips, and a gentle, elegant melody flowed forth. Her soft singing brought the glaze lilies to life, their stalks straightening and blooms opening even wider, the fragrance growing richer. When the song ended, Ganyu sat amidst the flowers, looking like a picture-perfect masterpiece. After a long silence, she finally stood, picking one of the flowers before stepping out of the field. Alright, Luo Qing, I need to head back now. What about you? This time, it felt like Ganyu was genuinely asking him. Luo Qing, I'm heading back. Will you come with me? Of course, I'll go back with you, Luo Qing said with a smile. But Ganyu, after all the walking, don't you want to rest a bit longer? No, not really. Honestly, the journey itself already made me feel much better. Luo Qing suddenly heard the rustling of reeds nearby, causing him to momentarily miss Ganyu's words. It's nothing. Ganyu's face turned slightly awkward, and she spoke softly, let's go back. Just as they started to leave, they unexpectedly ran into Lumen and her companions. Hovering above them, Paimon spotted them first and cried out excitedly, hey, look over there. Lumen and Zhongli turned in the direction Paimon was pointing, only to see Ganyu and Luo Qing walking side by side. Ganyu's head was lowered, her cheeks tinged pink, giving her the appearance of a shy girl on her first date. Paimon's call also caught Ganyu and Luo Qing's attention, and they turned to face Lumen's group. Everyone had met before, so it was only natural for them to greet each other rather than pretend not to see. They all gathered together. What are you guys doing here? What's your name again? Paimon asked, scratching her head as she tried to remember Ganyu's name. Wasn't it something like Wang Xiaomei? Lumen chimed in. My name is Ganyu. Ganyu murmured, feeling a bit embarrassed that the traveler didn't remember her name. She lowered her head. We just couldn't remember at the moment. Paimon said, offering an apologetic smile before looking puzzled. But Ganyu, aren't you the secretary for the Liyue Qing? What are you doing with a Fatui Harbinger? Harbinger? Ganyu was stunned and turned to look at Luo Qing. She had always wondered how an ordinary Snezhnayan merchant could move faster than her reflexes. It turned out Luo Qing was actually a harbinger? So, was his approach to her just? Well, Paimon's right. I am a harbinger, Luo Qing admitted casually, flashing a smile. Since it was already out in the open, there was no point in hiding it, so he decided to shift the blame onto Child. But right now, I'm on vacation. You should know that the one in charge of Liyue is Child. The Fatui aren't exactly the most trustworthy, Paimon said, frowning. If you don't believe me, you can ask Mr. Zhongli right here. He's my fishing buddy, Luo Qing replied, nodding towards Zhongli, who stood behind Lumen and Paimon. Zhongli's expression was a mix of emotions. It was as if he was thinking, I just retired, and you've already managed to steal away my most dependable subordinate? Zhongli glanced at Ganyu, who was standing quietly with her head down, and then back at Luo Qing. He nodded and said calmly, whether Luo Qing is on vacation, I'm not certain. But yes, we do often fish together. I guess that's fine then. By the way, aren't you guys supposed to be in Liyue? What brings you out here? Luo Qing asked, deciding to steer the conversation before Paimon's curiosity could derail them. We're here to find wild glaze lilies with Mr. Zhongli. Paimon explained. They're needed for the rite of parting for the Geo Archon. Have you seen any wild glaze lilies? Not the cultivated ones from Yujing Terrace, but the wild ones. Lumen added eagerly. Actually, I have one right here, Ganyu said, gently pulling the glaze lily she had picked from her pouch. I was going to bring it back to my office, but since you need it, you can have it. Thank you, Wang no, I mean, Ganyu. Paimon accepted the flower without hesitation, inspecting it closely. It's just like Zhongli said, it's blooming even more beautifully, and the fragrance is much stronger. That's because Ganyu sang to it, Luo Qing explained, purposely not mentioning the hidden field full of glaze lilies to prevent Lumen from picking them all. So singing really does make them bloom. If only we hadn't run into a whopper flower earlier. Paimon said, sighing. After chatting for a while, Ganyu, worried about the ongoing work in Liyue Harbor, bid farewell to Lumen's group. Luo Qing initially wanted to speak with Zhongli privately, but seeing Ganyu leaving, he decided to arrange a meeting at the Wangsheng funeral parlor instead. He followed Ganyu back to Liyue, walking in step with her. Chapter 35, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable 35. Maybe it was because Ganyu had learned about Luo Qing's position as a harbinger, but on the way back to Liyue, there seemed to be a slight distance between them. No matter how Luo Qing tried to tease her, Ganyu remained hesitant, keeping a noticeable distance as if reluctant to get too close to someone associated with the Fatui. Luo Qing didn't take it personally. After all, most of the unrest in Liyue was due to the Fatui's meddling, so it made sense that Ganyu would be cautious around him. Several days later, Liyue Harbor finally came back into view. But unlike before, the floating jade chamber had shifted locations, no longer hovering above the Golden House but positioned closer to Liyue Bridge. Additional Millilith guards were stationed on the bridge as well. From a distance, Luo Qing spotted a familiar figure with lavender hair, directing the crowds. As the two of them approached, that figure stepped forward to greet them. Ganyu, you're just in time. Ning Guang is waiting for you on the Jade Chamber. You should head there immediately, and who might this be? Keqing asked urgently, her eyes flicking over to Luo Qing. She recalled that Ganyu had mentioned taking a break for some relaxation. So, who was this man beside her? Hello, Miss Keqing. I'm Ganyu's friend, Luo Qing, he introduced himself. Luo Qing. Keqing's brow furrowed. She remembered Ning Guang mentioning this name, categorizing him as someone to watch closely, especially because of his position as a Fatui Harbinger. This area is currently under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Civil Affairs, Keqing said in a measured tone. If you have no official business, Luo Qing, I suggest you return to the city for your own safety. She didn't openly acknowledge her knowledge of his identity. For now, handling the arrival of the Adepti was a higher priority. Keqing, what's happening here? Ganyu asked, eyeing the Millilith moving equipment in the distance, her voice tinged with concern. The abandoned Guizhong ballista was repaired, and Ning Guang wants it brought to the Jade Chamber just in case, Keqing explained tersely. Ganyu fell silent, feeling a pang of sadness. There was a clear sense of tension in Keqing's words. The Adepti only recognized the Geo Archon and the contract, not the Liyue Qixing. If the Adepti came with hostile intentions, conflict wasn't out of the question. And in such a scenario, where would that leave her, someone who was neither fully human nor adeptus? I'll have a good talk with Ning Guang, Ganyu said firmly. Then, remembering that Luo Qing was still beside her, she turned to him politely. Luo Qing. I have to go back to work now. I'll see you next time. All right, next time then, Luo Qing replied, waving as Ganyu left. A twinge of disappointment lingered in his heart. I finally went from Mr. Luo Qing to just Luo Qing, and now I'm back to Mr. Luo Qing again. The Fatui's reputation is really just too terrible. Before long, Luo Qing returned to the Northland Bank. Even before entering, he could feel several eyes watching him. With a quick glance down the street, his years of experience in intelligence work allowed him to spot several plainclothes spies monitoring the bank's entrance. Inside, Natalia was busy talking to a customer at the counter. When she noticed Luo Qing enter, she rushed to his side, clearly concerned. Luo Qing, where have you been the past few days? We thought something happened to you. I just went on a little vacation, Luo Qing said with a shrug. But why are there so many eyes on us now? It's because of Lord Child, Natalia explained. Ever since the research camp replicated enough sigils of permission, he's been spreading rumors non-stop. Rumors that the Adepti in Jueyun Karst are furious over the death of the Geo Archon and are planning to come to Liyue for answers. If the Qixing can't give them what they want, they'll supposedly take matters into their own hands and reset Liyue with force. The Tianquan is furious, so she's been restricting our movements. Even ordinary Snezhnayan merchants are under surveillance now. Do you think the Qixing would really fight those Adepti? Natalia asked, her curiosity piqued. That's Liyue's business, not ours, Luo Qing replied nonchalantly. Stay out of sight unless absolutely necessary, got it? Yes, Luo Qing, Natalia nodded obediently. After a few more instructions, Luo Qing made his way upstairs. The moment he opened the door, he felt that something was off. Walking to the balcony, he called out. It's cold outside. Why don't you come in? As soon as he spoke, a water-thin thread of elemental energy dropped from the roof, attaching itself to the railing. In the next moment, Yelan gracefully flipped down onto the balcony. Luo Qing didn't seem surprised. He walked back inside, casually preparing tea as he spoke. What brings you to me again? He asked. His tone was calm, yet the implication was clear. Why had she decided to spy on him so openly? Orders from above. I'm just following instructions, Yelan replied, taking a seat at the tea table. Luo Qing chuckled. Even now, your Lady Ningguang still has time to worry about me. Pouring a cup of tea, he placed it in front of her. Yelan took a sip without hesitation. As much as I'd like to investigate your Lord Child, I was told to focus on you. So, I have to follow orders. Oh, I'm just a law-abiding citizen, Luo Qing said with a grin. There's nothing interesting here. But how long do you plan to keep your little spies on me? Until the matter with the Geo Archon is fully resolved, and until the situation with the Adepti is settled, Yelan said matter-of-factly. Ugh, sounds like a headache, Luo Qing said, rubbing his temple as he glanced out at the ocean. Then, he leaned forward, a playful glint in his eyes. You know, my bed is big and comfy. Why don't you stay the night? Irritation +1 from Yelan. That won't be necessary. I have my own arrangements, Yelan replied with an unreadable expression. Oh? Aren't you worried I might sneak out while you're sleeping? How can you be so sure? Luo Qing pressed. I really think you should sleep with me tonight. That way, if I move, you'll know right away. I won't have a chance to slip away. Completely foolproof. Yelan stared at him, utterly speechless. After a long moment, she muttered, You're insufferable, before downing her tea in one gulp and vanishing over the balcony. Of course, she didn't stop her surveillance. She simply didn't want to engage with Luo Qing any longer. Now sitting on the rooftop alone, Yelan rested her chin on her hand, staring out at the distant ocean. She was waiting for this whole mess to end. Ningguang's reason for sending her to watch Luo Qing was simple, because Luo Qing wouldn't retaliate against her. Anyone else would likely have ended up bound and thrown into the sea by now. Luo Qing called out a few more times, but when Yelan refused to respond, he lost interest. No matter how long she watches, she won't find anything worthwhile, he thought to himself. As long as Child keeps stirring up trouble, I just have to sit back and wait. Judging by the current progress, it wouldn't be long before Osial came looking for him for revenge. I wonder if Ningguang and the others will be able to handle it when the time comes. Chapter 36, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 36. Days went by. Maybe because the rooftop really was too cold, Yelan eventually gave in to Luo Qing's persistent persuasion and moved inside. For the past few days, they practically lived and ate together, with Yelan only leaving to hide somewhere else when it was time to sleep. But even then, according to Luo Qing's item tracking tool, she never strayed more than 10 meters away from him. Every time he checked, Yelan's name was always within range. To her credit, Yelan was undeniably diligent when it came to her duties. One morning. Maybe it was the calm before the storm or just a spell of bad weather, but despite being early in the day, dark clouds loomed over Liyue harbor, casting a gloomy atmosphere over the entire port. The tense mood was palpable. The adepti who came to confront the Qixing had already started arriving over the past few days. Fortunately, with Ganyu's mediation, no fights had broken out. Yet, despite her best efforts, the two sides remained locked in a tense standoff with no progress on solving the matter of the Geo Archon's death. Waking up early, Luo Qing habitually scanned his surroundings with his tracking item, but this time, he couldn't detect Yelan's presence. He stepped out onto the balcony, called out for her a few times, but received no reply. It dawned on him then Yelan was gone. After washing up, he went downstairs to the bank's lobby, where he saw a few familiar faces. The traveler, Paimon, and Zhongli were in the lobby, seemingly asking around for information about the recent events in Liyue. Luo Qing didn't interrupt, instead leaning on the railing, eavesdropping on their conversation from above. Sensing Luo Qing's gaze, Zhongli looked up and met his eyes. Luo Qing put a finger to his lips, and Zhongli played along, not revealing his presence. He continued speaking with the traveler and Paimon. Soon enough, the traveler seemed to have an epiphany, grabbed Paimon by the leg, and dashed out of the Northland Bank. Zhongli also exited with them. Once the coast was clear, Luo Qing descended the stairs. He already knew where the traveler and Zhongli were headed, and while he could have followed them, he decided it wasn't necessary. After all, he thought, child is my colleague. No need to intervene, especially since the traveler can handle herself just fine. More curious about the commotion at the Wangsheng funeral parlor, Luo Qing headed in that direction. Even before he turned the corner, he saw a squad of Millelith soldiers blocking the entrance to the parlor, and he could hear heated voices coming from the crowd. We, the Wangsheng funeral parlor, have been here since the Archon War, for 77 generations. And now you dare accuse us of colluding with the Fatui? Do you even know what you're talking about? Hu Tao stood firmly at the entrance, hands on her hips, face puffed up in righteous anger, refusing to let the Millelith enter. Master Hu, said the squad leader in a cold tone, we have solid evidence that your consultant, Zhongli, has had dealings with a Fatui Harbinger. If the Wangsheng funeral parlor is truly innocent, why do you resist us taking him in for questioning? This is a matter of Liyue's safety. I advise you not to interfere. Humph. I personally approved all of Zhongli's tasks. If you want to take him, then take me too. Hu Tao declared, stepping in front of Zhongli. Master Hu, they do have a point. It's best if I... No way. Hu Tao cut him off with a stubborn huff. We haven't done anything wrong. Why should you be taken away? Zhongli, don't worry. As long as I'm here, they won't lay a hand on you. Luo Qing watched as Zhongli, for once, wore an expression of helplessness. What must be going through Zhongli's mind right now, being falsely accused of colluding with the Fatui to assassinate the Geo Archon himself? Luo Qing mused, smirking. Just then, Zhongli's eyes met Luo Qing's among the crowd. Luo Qing gave him a knowing smile, lightly patting his chest before activating his last item card. The next moment, the squad leader, who had been firmly arguing with Hu Tao, suddenly burst into tears. His sobs grew louder until he collapsed to his knees, crying and shouting. I confess. I admit it. I shouldn't have gone to that auction and secretly bought the chamber pot used by the Geo Archon. I even compared its size when I got home. Everyone, from Hu Tao to the Millelith, stood there in stunned silence, utterly bewildered. Weren't we just arguing a second ago? How did this turn into this? The Millelith soldiers, equally shocked, struggled to console their weeping commander, but his sobs wouldn't stop. Embarrassed, they quickly dragged him away from the Wangsheng funeral parlor, planning to return once their leader had calmed down. With the show over, the crowd dispersed. Luo Qing approached Zhongli and Hu Tao, giving Zhongli a quick glance before focusing on the furious funeral director. Even the densest man should realize when a girl is upset, Luo Qing thought, chuckling softly. Then, he reached out to gently pat Hu Tao's hat, soothingly saying. Come on, Master Hu. Don't be mad. It's just that Liyue is in turmoil, and they're a bit desperate. Besides, they're not the brightest bunch. Humph. The funeral rites for the Geo Archon should be the top priority, but instead, they're obsessed with hunting down some imaginary assassin. We're helping prepare for the rite of parting, and they have the nerve to accuse us of treachery. It's infuriating. Hu Tao stomped her foot, cheeks puffed up indignantly. Suddenly realizing what she was doing, she swatted Luo Qing's hand away, adding, "And don't pat my head. I'm still growing." All right," Luo Qing said, retracting his hand. "You're here to see Consultant Zhongli again, aren't you?" Hu Tao asked, raising an eyebrow as her temper seemed to cool. Is that a problem?" Luo Qing replied cautiously. "Humph. I didn't say it was," Hu Tao huffed before turning to leave. "I've got to teach a class to the staff. You two talk things over." After Hu Tao left, giving them space, Luo Qing turned his gaze to the distant Golden House and asked casually. "Is the situation in Liyue unfolding as you expected, Mr. Zhongli? All the tensions have reached a boiling point." "It won't take much to tip them over," Zhongli replied calmly. "Managing such a volatile situation will test the abilities and wisdom of the ruling powers. If they fail, Liyue could descend into chaos. So, Mr. Zhongli, how did you handle such matters in the past?" "Me?" Zhongli paused, his expression turning thoughtful. "Back then, they wouldn't dare to act this way." "That's not because they wouldn't, it's because they didn't dare," Luo Qing thought, amused. "But don't worry, Mr. Zhongli. The plan remains the same. The real show is yet to come," Luo Qing said, a smile playing on his lips. Though the plan had been laid out by Zhongli, Luo Qing, and the Lady Harbinger, it was clear that Luo Qing and the lady were just facilitating something that was inevitable. Child didn't need much nudging to create chaos, it had all been part of his plan since the moment he arrived in Liyue. Even the creation of the sigils of permission had been prepared back in Snezhnia under Luo Qing's supervision, just waiting for Child to arrive and set things in motion. Of course, Zhongli wasn't privy to all these details. He simply assumed that Luo Qing had successfully guided Child to this outcome. For Zhongli, this was exactly what he wanted, to see if Liyue could stand on its own, without a god to guide it. As they continued to converse, a sudden burst of golden light shot from the Golden House, soaring into the sky before veering off toward Gyun Stone Forest. Moments later, the ground trembled, and the stone pillars that formed Gyun Stone Forest began to shake. The sea, darkened under the stormy sky, churned with growing intensity. Chapter 37, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 37. The waves on the sea grew fiercer, crashing violently as a massive figure emerged from the depths near Gyun Stone Forest, rapidly advancing toward Liyue harbor. The lookout tower sounded alarm bells, urging ships to hastily return to port. Those too far out began sailing away from the harbor, all seemingly avoiding a certain impending threat. Thunder rumbled overhead as the Jade Chamber soared across the sky, heading out to the sea. Meanwhile, the Millelith soldiers hurried through the streets, gathering at the port in an organized manner. It was clear they had anticipated this, as they moved without panic. "It's finally happening," Luo Qing muttered, watching the ominous shadow beneath the sea. "Mr. Zhongli, you'd better take Master Hu Tao and retreat somewhere safe. After all, Liyue is a harbor city, and one casual wave from that guy could be disastrous," Luo Qing said, nodding toward the approaching threat. Zhongli calmly replied, "For ordinary people, this is indeed a catastrophe. Farewell." With that, Zhongli turned and returned to the Wangsheng funeral parlor, preparing to take Hu Tao to the mountains for safety. After all, Hu Tao was his current employer, he couldn't allow any harm to come to her. As Zhongli left, Luo Qing also made his way back to the Northland Bank. Seeing the commotion out on the sea, some confused Snezhnian merchants had started to panic and rushed to the bank for refuge. Being an official Snezhnian establishment in Liyue, the Northland Bank served as a kind of embassy. Once inside, they were under its protection. Luo Qing glanced around the lobby, noticing that all the guards had been pulled away, leaving only the trembling Snezhnian merchants. He didn't even need to ask to know that this was undoubtedly on Child's orders. "Luo Qing, what should we do now?" Natalia and the others, visibly nervous, calmed down slightly once they saw Luo Qing enter. The looming presence of an ancient god was terrifying, and even the residual shockwaves from such a battle could easily crush them like ants. "You need to evacuate the people in the bank to the mountains. This place is too dangerous. If just one wave crashes down, you'll all be dead," Luo Qing ordered, looking at the panicked merchants surrounding them. In Child's absence, Luo Qing was now the highest authority here. And what about you, Luo Qing? Natalia asked, concern evident in her voice. Me? I'm invincible, that thing out there won't be able to harm me. Now go, follow orders and stop dawdling. With a sharp rebuke, Luo Qing gestured to Sergei and Igor, who nodded and began organizing the evacuation of the merchants. Child, the reckless brute that he was solely focused on causing chaos. He clearly didn't care about the lives of the merchants, nor did it even occur to him that he should have evacuated his own people before attempting to wake Osial. Out on the streets, the people of Liyue hurriedly followed the Millilith's instructions, heading toward Yujing Terrace to escape the impending danger by ascending Mount Tianheng. Soon, the bustling streets of Liyue became deserted, save for the soldiers standing at attention by the docks and the figures aboard the Jade Chamber Ningguang, the Qixing, and the Adepti. Luo Qing stood alone on the balcony of the bank, watching the sea. Before long, a colossal figure broke through the water's surface, its entire body towering over the waves and rising to the same height as the Jade Chamber itself. And the first words that bellowed out of its mouth shook the entire harbor. TNG star Li Feiyu, come out and face your death. Osial's thunderous voice echoed across Liyue harbor. On the Jade Chamber, Ningguang and the others, along with the Adepti, were left utterly dumbfounded. Isn't Osial supposed to be an enemy of the Geo Archon? They wondered. Why is the first thing out of its mouth a demand for Li Feiyu? And what's with the strange black markings all over Osial's body? Some of them look like little chickens, and is that a ball? Are those dancing figures? Upon closer inspection, they noticed large black characters painted around Osial's neck that read, Liyue TNG star Li Feiyu was here. Everyone stared in disbelief. No wonder Osial came out screaming for Li Feiyu's head. It was because someone had turned its body into a canvas for artistic expression. The poor creature had been defaced so thoroughly that even its own wife probably wouldn't recognize it anymore. Suddenly, Luo Qing's system interface lit up with notifications. Plus 10 frustration points from Ningguang. Plus 10 frustration points from Ganyu. Plus 10 frustration points from Qixing. Plus 10 frustration points from Yelan. Plus 10 frustration points from Cloud Retainer. Plus 10 frustration points from Mountain Shaper. Plus 10 frustration points from Moon Carver. Plus 10 frustration points from Wang Fugui. The fear and concern Osial had struck into the hearts of Liyue's inhabitants now morphed into Luo Qing's precious anxiety points, his system's notifications updating almost every second, and the rate was only increasing. The Adepti, already angry at the Qixing, grew even more furious upon seeing the state of Osial. Now they were convinced that the Qixing were irresponsible jokesters who couldn't handle serious matters. Cloud Retainer spat, TNG star Li Feiyu. Humph. Is this how your Qixing conducts business? Not gonna lie, the drawings are pretty good, Paimon commented, hovering nearby. Yeah, they are, Lumen agreed. Ningguang, Qixing and the others looked grim, thinking, who on earth is this Li Feiyu? He's definitely not one of our Qixing. Esteemed Adepti, I believe the most pressing matter is not this Li Feiyu, but rather how to deal with Osial, Ningguang interjected. We can discuss the rest after we've taken care of Osial. Ningguang knew that any attempt at explaining the situation to the Adepti would be futile at this point. It was better to focus on the immediate threat and deal with the aftermath later. Meanwhile, down in the city, hearing Osial's deafening roar, Shenhe glanced up at the Jade Chamber. Seeing her master standing there, she assumed Li Feiyu must be up there as well. With that thought, she activated her adeptal arts and leapt toward the floating structure. The group on the Jade Chamber was still debating when Shenhe suddenly landed among them. Cloud Retainer's eyes widened in surprise. Shenhe! What are you doing here, child? Shenhe scanned the crowd but didn't see Luo Qing. She responded calmly, Master, the person I seek is Li Feiyu. Everyone else was speechless. Li Feiyu again. Cloud Retainer's temper flared. Humph! Qixing, is this how you operate? Colluding with the Fatui and stealing from my domain? We will settle this account as well. Is Li Feiyu not here? Shenhe asked, turning to Ningguang and the others. I understand that you may not believe me, Ningguang said, frowning slightly, but there is no such person as TNG star Li Feiyu among the Qixing. Still, she mentally noted the name Li Feiyu. Daring to use the Qixing's title as a shield? You better hope I never catch you. Interesting, Cloud Retainer sneered. So, my disciple and Osial are both lying, are they? Before the situation could escalate further, Osial interrupted their standoff. Frustrated by the lack of response, his anger grew. Very well. Whether it's Morix or Li Feiyu, since you refuse to show yourselves, I will flood all of Liyue. With that, he summoned a massive tidal wave, aiming it directly at Liyue Harbor. Chapter 38, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is Too Unreliable. 38. As the giant wave surged forward, the people on the Jade Chamber had no time for further disputes. The Adepti quickly formed a protective barrier, shielding Liyue from the force of the wave before taking to the sky, launching their attacks on Osial. For a moment, the area around Osial was filled with dazzling bursts of energy, but none of it seemed to deal significant damage. Though Osial had been sealed for so long, a god is still a god, and its power remained formidable. Even with the combined efforts of the Adepti, victory was far from certain. Each time Osial summoned another massive wave, the Adepti had to work together just to hold it back. In their desperate attempt to defend Liyue, the Adepti and the Qixing were gradually being overpowered. Just as the situation seemed dire, a barrage of golden arrows rained down from the Jade Chamber, striking Osial and eliciting a series of agonized roars. These were not ordinary arrows, they came from the Guizhong ballista, a weapon from the Archon War. With the ballista's relentless assault, Osial's massive body became an easy target, each volley leaving deep wounds. For a moment, the tide of battle shifted, and Osial began to retreat under the onslaught. The Millilith stationed at the harbor cheered, believing the victory was within reach. Their morale soared. However, the current Millilith was nothing like the elite force from the Archon War that had once hunted gods. These days, they were more suited to maintaining law and order rather than fighting ancient gods. Their strength was far from what it once was. And just when they thought victory was assured, shadows emerged from the southern mountains, moving stealthily through the storm toward the battlefield. While the Qixing and the Adepti were focused on the battle against Osial, a faint blue glow appeared on the deck of the Jade Chamber, where the Guizhong ballista was stationed. Several portals opened, and from them emerged well-armed Fatui skirmishers, their sights set on sabotaging the ballista. The Adepti and Qixing were fully engaged in their struggle with Osial, leaving the defense of the ballista to Lumen and a small detachment of Millilith soldiers stationed on the Jade Chamber. The Millilith posed little threat, so in the end, it was essentially Lumen facing the Fatui forces alone. Without hesitation, Lumen's eyes sharpened as she drew the dull blade, engaging the Fatui skirmishers in combat. Meanwhile, back at the Northland Bank, Natalia and the others had returned to the building after successfully evacuating the Snezhnayan merchants. As Luo Qing's personal subordinates, they couldn't abandon him, even in the face of such danger. While Luo Qing had a quirky temper and an unpredictable personality, they still considered themselves lucky. If he hadn't chosen them to be his subordinates, they might have ended up on the Jade Chamber, fighting to destroy the Guizhong ballista alongside the rest of the Fatui. Luo Qing, is this part of the plan that child ordered? Natalia asked. They're just marching to their deaths, aren't they? Sergei added. Osial's already been unleashed. What's the point of sending them up there? Natalia's voice wavered with fear. She had just emerged from training, and seeing the fierce battle unfolding above filled her with a deep sense of dread. Some of the Fatui soldiers now lying dead on the battlefield had been Northland Bank guards, people she had spoken to not long ago. Even though Lumen was holding back to avoid unnecessary death, her strikes enhanced by Adepti magic were deadly to the ordinary soldiers. With each clash, another Fatui soldier fell. Although Natalia, Sergei, and Igor couldn't see the details of the battle, the sight of their comrades falling one by one weighed heavily on their hearts. They understood Child's plan, but they didn't understand why, after releasing Osial, he had sent people to interfere further. Are you scared? Luo Qing asked, glancing at them casually. You should understand something, soldiers live to follow orders, even when those orders lead them to certain death. Of course, if it were up to him, Luo Qing would have been more cunning. He wouldn't have let his people die so senselessly. As he spoke, a familiar figure caught his eye through one of the portals. Electro-Chechen mage Teresa. So, she's there too. Luo Qing had suspected this after his conversations with Teresa back at Gyun Stone Forest. He had a feeling Child had gathered the surrounding Fatui forces for this exact moment. But now that he saw Teresa fighting on the Jade Chamber, a complicated feeling stirred within him. The Electro-Chechen mages, with their distinctive combat style and rigorous selection process, were far stronger than regular skirmishers. Teresa herself had considerable combat experience, more than many of her peers. Her Chechens, sparking with electricity, joined the fray, making it difficult even for Lumen to hold her ground. Just when Luo Qing thought Teresa might succeed in destroying the ballista and retreating, an elderly figure in the sky summoned a zither. With each note, the energy around Lumen surged, and soon she was surrounded by even more powerful magic. It was Madame Ping's boon. Lumen, now strengthened by the Adepti's support, grew even more formidable. Each swing of her sword cut through Teresa's chichens, killing them en masse. With her chichens gone, Teresa's combat ability plummeted, and the Fatui forces were once again at a disadvantage. Not only could they not destroy the ballista, but now they were struggling just to survive. The portal they had used to arrive was a one-way ticket. The only way out for them now was to leap from the several hundred-meter height of the Jade Chamber, an almost certain death sentence. TCH, this is really a tough spot. Luo Qing muttered, watching Teresa's desperate situation. Though he wouldn't normally intervene, the sight of Teresa cornered, her life hanging by a thread, tugged at him. If he jumped in to save her, and the Qixing or Adepti recognized him, all the trust he had painstakingly built would be gone. Ah, screw it. I'll save her, he muttered, shaking his head. If he hadn't shared those moments of casual conversation and meals with Teresa back at her little camp, he might not have cared. But now, after spending time with the lively, energetic girl, the thought of her dying here felt regrettable. Igor, give me your hood and mask, Luo Qing ordered. Igor hesitated, glancing at the Jade Chamber high above. Sir, are you sure you want to go up there? It's too dangerous. Luo Qing, irritated, snapped, do I need to repeat myself? I'm perfectly fine. Now hurry up. Without further protest, Igor handed over his hood and mask. Luo Qing slipped them on, covering his face. His eyes, now glowing with a golden, cat-like gleam, disappeared as he leapt from the balcony. On the Jade Chamber, Teresa stood alone, the last remaining Fatui operative, cornered at the edge of the deck. Her once pristine combat gear was torn, her body riddled with cuts and bleeding as rain mixed with blood, staining the ground beneath her. Behind her was a sheer drop, hundreds of meters down to the port below. If she fell, there would be no coming back. But with Lumen and Qixing closing in, there was nowhere else for her to go. After all, they had come to sabotage the ballista. It was only natural that their enemies wouldn't let them leave alive. Qixing's sword crackled with lightning as she approached. Teresa steeled herself, believing this was the end. Soon, she would join her fallen comrades. But just as Qixing's blade was about to strike, her vision blurred. In the blink of an eye, Teresa felt herself being swept off her feet, held securely in someone's arms as they evaded the deadly strike. A figure, cloaked in a hood, had come to her rescue. Chapter 39, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 39. Who are you? Teresa murmured, dazed. For some reason, she felt as though she'd seen this person before, but with the hood obscuring his face, she couldn't see clearly. Luo Qing remained silent as he gently set Teresa down. He glanced toward the distant Osial, who was entangled with the Adepti, and then at the Guizhong ballista on the deck. With a slight gesture, he summoned his 1000 rock spear. That's the 1000 rock spear. On the Jade Chamber, the people who recognized the weapon looked at the hooded man with suspicion, unsure of his motives. The next moment, Luo Qing flicked his finger, and several dark brown stone spears materialized, shooting straight toward the Guizhong ballista. Not good. He's going to destroy the ballista. Qixing shouted in alarm, rushing toward the ballista in a desperate attempt to stop the stone spears. But they were too fast. Before she could reach it, the ballista had been pierced, rendered inoperable. Realizing that this hooded figure was an enemy, Lumen brandished her dull blade and charged toward Luo Qing. But Luo Qing didn't move. He stood perfectly still, letting Lumen approach. As Lumen's sword closed in, she saw Luo Qing raise his head slightly, revealing two golden, slit-pupil eyes that locked with hers. In that moment, Lumen felt as if she wasn't staring at a person, but at some ancient being. The next second, her blade missed its mark. Luo Qing and Teresa had vanished from the Jade Chamber. Who is he? The crowd was filled with speculation. Summoning stone spears and wielding the 1000 rock spear, there had to be some connection to Liyue, but now was not the time to dwell on it. With the Guizhong ballista destroyed, how were they going to deal with Osial? Meanwhile, Luo Qing, having rescued Teresa, leapt a few times and returned to the Northland bank. She suffered multiple sword wounds. Help her get treated, Luo Qing ordered, placing the wounded Teresa on a bed before swiftly disappearing over the balcony. Seeing Luo Qing about to leave again, Natalia hurried after him, calling out, "Sir, where are you going?" "Don't worry. I'm just going to see a friend," he replied before vanishing. When Luo Qing descended from the Jade Chamber earlier, he had spotted Zhongli standing alone on a nearby rocky outcrop, watching the battle unfold on the sea. This was a rare opportunity to hear what the old man was thinking, and Luo Qing wasn't going to miss it. On the southern mountainside, Zhongli stood in solitude, gazing out at the battlefield on the ocean. A moment later, Luo Qing appeared beside him. "Weren't you supposed to be evacuating Hutao? Why are you standing here alone?" Luo Qing asked, stepping up beside Zhongli. Hutao insisted on staying with the Wangsheng funeral parlor. No matter what I said, she refused to leave. Mentioning Hutao brought a hint of weariness to Zhongli's otherwise composed expression. "So you just left her there alone?" Luo Qing raised a brow, wondering at this rather peculiar approach. "Not exactly," Zhongli shook his head and explained, "I used some small techniques to put her to sleep and instructed the funeral parlor attendants to take her to a safe place." As expected from Zhongli. "So, how are you feeling now?" "A bit anxious," Luo Qing inquired, adopting a more casual tone. "A little," Zhongli admitted with a nod. "It's kind of like waiting outside a school while your child takes an exam, nervous and worried. Except, unlike most parents, you could walk in and help them finish the test yourself if you wanted." Luo Qing chuckled as he watched the distant battle unfold. "A rather curious analogy, but it does capture some of the sentiment," Zhongli said, nodding again in agreement. He then added, "By the way, I heard Osial calling out for someone named Li Feiyu, cursing him with a hatred even greater than for me. But there's no such person among the Qixing. Do you have any insight on this?" "Never heard of him," Luo Qing responded quickly. "Not familiar at all." I see," Zhongli murmured, casting a thoughtful glance toward the Jade Chamber. "Perhaps there are deeper reasons behind all of this." Luo Qing immediately chimed in, Right. I think so too. This entire battle was a test for Liyue. Zhongli wouldn't interfere until the final moment, leaving the city's fate to its inhabitants. As for Luo Qing's destruction of the Guizhong ballista when rescuing Teresa, that was simply to curry favor with child later. After all, if he hadn't intervened, Osial would have destroyed the ballista anyway. The outcome would have been the same. With the ballista out of commission, the tide of the battle on the Jade Chamber shifted once again. Osial began summoning increasingly larger waves, and despite the combined efforts of the Adepti and Shenhe, some of the waves crashed into the outer harbor, causing significant damage to buildings and ships. Just as the defense line was about to break, a soft yellow light spread across the Jade Chamber. Above, Ningguang floated in the air, casting a protective barrier around the Jade Chamber. She ordered the others to retreat, leaving only herself behind. She then began to pilot the Jade Chamber, steering it directly toward Osial. However, just as the Jade Chamber was about to crash into Osial, a sharp cry pierced the air from the sea below. Another beast, similar in size to Osial, emerged from the depths. It was Baicht, Osial's wife. Either of the two monsters alone might have struggled to withstand the Jade Chamber's assault, but together, they conjured a powerful water vortex and hurled it toward the descending platform. With a thunderous crash, the vortex was broken, and the Jade Chamber still landed on Osial and Baicht, leaving large gashes on their bodies. But the power of the platform had been diminished, and it could no longer suppress Osial. Now, the two beasts loomed over the sea together, still very much alive. "Ha, is that all you've got? Morax. Li Feiyu. Come out and face me. If you surrender now, I might consider leaving these people in one piece. Otherwise, I'll drown this entire city." Osial's voice thundered across the harbor. With his wife by his side, the prospect of Morax not appearing emboldened him further. The Adepti and the Millilith wouldn't be able to stop them now. On the harbor, both the Qixing and Adepti watched in silence, frowning at the growing threat. The effects of the forbidden ritual would only last for so long, but if they retreated now, by the time the ritual wore off, Liyue the millennia-old city would be in ruins. "Lady Ningguang, what should we do now?" a Millilith soldier asked, dejected. With the Jade Chamber now destroyed, Ningguang's expression was grim. Her usual confidence had faded. After a long pause, she finally ordered, "We've lost this battle. Prioritize the evacuation of civilians inland. As for the city, buildings can be rebuilt, but our people must survive. Understood, Lady Ningguang. As the Millelith began preparations to retreat, Osial and Beisht conjured another massive wave, poised to crash down upon Liyue. This one aimed straight at Liyue Harbor. Chapter 40, This Trainee Fatui Harbinger is too unreliable. 40. The massive wave surged forward, and the Adepti soared into the sky, quickly forming a barrier that enveloped the entire harbor, hoping to hold back the tide. But this time, the wave was summoned by the combined might of Osial and Beisht, far more powerful than any previous assault. The deep blue waters roared like an unstoppable beast, crashing against the golden barrier with thunderous force. The barrier trembled, on the verge of shattering at any moment. The Millelith had already followed orders to evacuate civilians to the inland regions. Now, only Lumen, Ningguang, and the Adepti remained, standing as the final line of defense for Liyue Harbor. Without the Jade Chamber and the Guizhong Ballista, even those blessed with visions like Ningguang and the others found themselves too weak to challenge the might of a god. With the Jade Chamber gone, they couldn't hope to defeat Osial, let alone get close enough to try. Wave after wave crashed against the Adepti's defensive barrier, and even though they combined their powers, cracks began to form on the surface of the shield. Standing at the harbor, Ganyu turned to look at Ningguang and the others, her eyes resolute. She lowered her longbow, cold determination flickering in her gaze. A blue light began to radiate from her fingers, spreading across her entire body. In the next moment, her form began to shift, growing larger at a rapid pace. As the light faded, a majestic azure Kylan stood before them. Ganyu, you foolish child! Above, Cloud Retainer watched, a hint of sadness in her eyes. For as long as Ganyu had lived among humans in Liyue, she had carefully concealed her Adeptus identity, attributing the horns on her head to a family heirloom whenever someone asked. Almost no one in Liyue knew that Ganyu was a half-Adeptus. But now, revealing her true form to protect Liyue meant that she had chosen the path of the Adepti, distancing herself from humanity. It was a choice that would inevitably create an invisible barrier between her and the people she had long served. The Kylan that Ganyu had become galloped across the surging waves, freezing everything in her path. With her vision amplifying her powers, Ganyu's control over cryo surpassed that of the Adepti, allowing her to manipulate vast amounts of ice. The towering wave froze solid, forming an icy barrier to slow the oncoming tide. But it didn't take long before another wave shattered the frozen wall, crashing once more against the weakening barrier. Ganyu knew that defense alone would not be enough. She leapt from the ice, dashing towards Osial. Ganyu, stop! Do you have any idea how long it's been since you've assumed your true form? How can you be so reckless? Cloud Retainer's voice was filled with worry, but she couldn't move from her position, bound by the need to maintain the barrier. All she could do was watch anxiously as Ganyu drew farther away. At the harbor, the silver-haired Shenhe stood firm, watching the Kylan engage Osial. A flicker of understanding crossed her usually expressionless face. She had always struggled to grasp human emotions, but seeing Ganyu transform and charge toward Osial, she felt like she was beginning to understand. Senior sister. Shenhe glanced down at her open palm. A moment later, she pushed off with her toes and charged into the waves. A surge of cryo-energy gathered beneath her feet, freezing the broken ice wall once again. The Adepti were granted a brief respite. Meanwhile, back on the rocky outcrop overlooking the battlefield, Luo Qing and Zhongli observed the clash on the sea, each with their own thoughts. Ever since Beisht had emerged from the depths to assist Osial in repelling the Jade Chamber's strike, Luo Qing's expression had grown more serious. This wasn't what they had planned. Wasn't there supposed to be only one boss, Osial? Where had Beisht come from? Did Child seriously summon Osial's wife just to provoke Zhongli into action? Did he really need to go that far? Beside him, Zhongli appeared calm, but seeing Ganyu reveal her true form as a Kylan had stirred something deep within him. He clasped his hands behind his back, fingers tapping thoughtfully against each other. It seemed he was debating whether to step in. Thinking about making a move, Zhongli? Luo Qing asked quietly, noticing the subtle tension. Indeed, Zhongli admitted with a nod. The current situation had been brought about because he allowed it, and it was the actions of the Fatui that had led to this confrontation. As the former god of war, he recognized that if this continued, the Adepti and the Qixing would be the first to falter and fall. He had seen Ningguang's determination in her decision to sacrifice the Jade Chamber, and he could feel the combined resolve of the Adepti and Ganyu, who fought with everything they had to protect Liyue Harbor. But the crisis had grown beyond what they could manage alone. He couldn't allow needless sacrifices. Just as Zhongli took a step forward, ready to intervene, Luo Qing held out a hand to stop him, his voice calm. If you step in now, Zhongli, have you thought about what comes next? What do you mean, next? Deep down, you've already made up your mind to step down and leave Liyue's future to the mortals, right? If you step in now, you'll be forced to continue playing the role of Rex Lapis. You'll have to keep handing down your divine decrees, won't you? But that's not what you want, is it? I have already seen the will of the Qixing and the Adepti. Their actions have exceeded my expectations. Zhongli's tone was pensive. But this situation has gone beyond their capacity to handle. Since I am the cause, it should end with me. If that's the case, how about letting me handle this in your place? Luo Qing's eyes drifted to the two sea monsters in the distance, facing off against Ganyu. His voice was light, but firm. You. Zhongli's brow furrowed with doubt. Yeah, me. Luo Qing chuckled. I carry Liyue's blood, and I'm still human. If I'm the one to take action, wouldn't that count as the people of Liyue handling their own problems? I suppose that's true. Despite Luo Qing being a Fatui Harbinger, his lineage was Liyuan, and his conduct reflected the culture and values of Liyue. Compared to the likes of Child or La Signora, Zhongli found him far more relatable. After all, if Zhongli didn't see him as a kindred spirit, he wouldn't have agreed to all those fishing trips. Luo Qing's offer to act in Liyue's stead was, in many ways, a valid solution. But could he handle it alone? Zhongli glanced at Luo Qing again. Why are you looking at me like that, Zhongli? Do you think I'm not up to the task? Luo Qing teased, eyes glinting with a playful smile as he glanced toward Ganyu, still fighting in the distance. How about this? Let's make a deal. If I solve this problem for you, you'll owe me a favor. A favor? Zhongli hesitated, then stepped back, giving his silent agreement. All right then, I'll remember that, Zhongli. Consider it noted, Luo Qing said with a grin, his eyes flashing with golden light. In an instant, he vanished from sight.
Thanks for listening.